Chapter 581, Young Pitt. What are you yelling about here? Pete glared at the other party, clearly dissatisfied. Knowing that the door is a public place, how could he just shout the name of the club? After checking left and right to make sure there was no one around, Pete pulled Michelle into the room. Speak slowly. What happened? If there is any major event in the club, it is impossible that no one notified me. I. Michelle's expression was extremely awkward. After a long moment of confusion, he stuffed the newspaper in his hand into Pete's arms. Look for yourself. It's hard for me to describe this matter to you. Pete took the newspaper in surprise and saw the headline that shocked him on the front page, "The Savior of the German Magic World. Chief Andre fought bravely and rescued thousands of innocent wizards." After being taken aback by this ridiculously exaggerated title, Pete began to read the detailed article carefully. The more he read, the more frightened he became. The report briefly described how two Nathans went to the Ministry of Magic to ask for help last night, and how Andre led the Aurors to rescue many wizards. There were also a few interviews with the parties involved. Regardless of the content of the interview or the author's description, they all pointed the finger at the Silver Lance Dueling Club, claiming that the club, a smuggling group, hoarded magical animals in Germany and illegally imprisoned a large number of civilian wizards. They even tried to use cruel brainwashing methods on those prisoners, which was simply inhumane. If some of the wizards hadn't risked their lives to escape and report the news, and if Director Andre hadn't shown his power, the consequences would have been disastrous. However, due to Andre's instructions, the wizards interviewed did not reveal the club's collusion with the Ministry of Magic to split Germany, so the entire report focused on denouncing the Silver Lance and praising Andre. What's going on here? Michelle looked at Pete in a panic. Didn't you say that those parks were attacked by people, which led to the loss of magical animals and personnel? Why are they now captives of the club? Did you kill those people? Have you been lying to us? And now you've been taken over by the Aurors? You ask me, who am I supposed to ask? Pete glanced at the contents of the newspaper with an ugly expression and replied angrily, "This is definitely not done by the club. Our park took more than 10 years of energy to build. Why would we bother? There must be something wrong here. You didn't do it. Then these hundreds of people are very sure that they were imprisoned by Silver Lance. Could it be that someone is pretending to be a member of the club?" Michelle actually thought that Pete would not do such a stupid thing. And some time ago, Pete was very busy because of the attack on the park, and Michelle also noticed it. There is such a possibility. Could it be that Andre did it? But it shouldn't be. With his personality, he wouldn't do such sneaky things, and it's not his style to lynch civilians. It takes a lot of resources to settle a few hundred people. Pete scanned the contents of the newspaper, trying to find something. Soon, Pete was attracted by one of the names. These people are now housed in the Schmidt family. Could it be that they are against the club? With their financial resources, they can do this, but how did they break through the park silently? Did someone collude with them? Or is the hidden strength of the Schmidt family stronger than imagined? Suddenly receiving so much information made Pete feel a little dizzy. Various possibilities appeared in his mind, and he even became suspicious. A special idea even popped up in his mind. Is it possible that these breeding grounds, parks, were attacked by the people inside the Silver Spear? Or was it done by the Silver Spear in collusion with outsiders? Pete pondered this deeply. He knew how high the security intensity of these parks was. It was impossible for them to be breached silently, and it was equally impossible to settle so many people and magical animals without prior preparation. This couldn't be done in just a few days. Even though Andre had disappeared for 2 or 3 days, Pete had never seriously suspected him. He believed he understood Andre's behavior well. Andre was not the type to play tricks. If Andre had discovered the club had a breeding base, he would have directly confronted Chi Renma. After thinking about it for a long time, Pete was still unsure of the truth. He finally said to Michelle, "I still don't know the specifics. You should go back to the Ministry of Magic to inquire about the situation. I'll come later." Michelle was also confused. He had joined the club hoping for benefits, but the situation had turned dire. He could foresee that if this incident was classified, the Silver Spear would become a pariah in Germany. However, Michel knew he was in too deep to quit Pete's camp, so he could only bite the bullet and agree. After sending Michel away, Pete returned to his bedroom, where another person was waiting. This person wore a Silver Spear costume but no mask, revealing a young face, around 30 years old. On closer inspection, he bore a striking resemblance to Pete, as if he were a younger version of him. This incident is too strange. I'm afraid there are hidden forces behind it that we don't know about. I must go back to the Ministry of Magic to investigate, Pete said, looking at the figure with a serious expression. You shouldn't be idle. Go back to headquarters and call all the spears you can contact for a discussion. Now is not the time for the Changfeng meeting. I'm afraid they won't respond, the figure replied, his voice identical to Pete's, as if Pete were talking to himself. I can't worry about that now, Pete said anxiously. Call as many as you can. I suspect there's a big problem in the club. Besides, the transportation team in Northern Europe hasn't sent back any news. It's been so long. They should have finished their rectification and started their journey again. However, there's no news at all. It's too abnormal. We need to arrange for someone to confirm the news. Okay, the figure nodded. Are you suspicious of those spears? Could it be one of the four of us? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. It's possible, but the Black Dragon is still in America. Theoretically, it doesn't meet the conditions. The only ones worthy of scrutiny are Thunderbird and Phoenix. But do they have the motive? Capturing those wizards without mastering the elixir formula is just asking for trouble, Pete said, his mind in turmoil. No matter what, let's wait until we see them. Phoenix should be in Germany these days, except for civil society organization affairs. I just don't know if Thunderbird is willing to show up. But to be honest, I'd rather believe in Thunderbird, Pete concluded. The younger Pete put on a faceless mask and apparated, disappearing from sight. It's impossible for that lunatic Thunderbird to do such a thing, but it doesn't mean he shares our goals, Pete muttered to himself. Pete shook his head and muttered to himself, then changed into his formal clothes and headed straight to the Ministry of Magic. Upon arriving, he bypassed his office and went directly to the law enforcement department to find Andre. Director Andre, why didn't you notify me of such a significant event? I had to read about your heroic deeds in the newspaper, Pete said, grinning and half-joking as he knocked on the director's office door. It's my fault, Minister Pete, Andre replied, showing a forced smile. The situation happened so suddenly that I barely had time to react. The two wizards who came to ask for help almost fainted on the spot. I see, Pete nodded thoughtfully. I haven't heard the detailed account of last night's events. Can you fill me in? Of course, Andre said, shaking his head as if it were no big deal. Last night, I was entertaining Edmund, the patriarch of the Schmidt family, and Mr. Wilson from the Silver Flash Trading Company in my ice. Then, out of nowhere, Andre gave Pete a rough account of the previous night's events, but withheld key information, such as the involvement of certain groups and clubs. So you're certain that the person who endangered those wizards is from the Silver Spear? Isn't it a bit presumptive to identify them just by their clothes? Pete asked tentatively. It's not just my word, Andre replied, feigning ignorance. The civilian wizards we rescued claimed that people from the club were imprisoning them. Some of these wizards were former collaborators of the club, and even they insisted on this conclusion. Could it be that there are people in the Silver Spear known to those collaborators? Pete wondered to himself. He then looked at Andre seriously. Why are those commoner wizards being placed in the Schmidt family manor? There was no other option, Andre said, shaking his head helplessly. You must have seen the miserable state of those people in the newspaper photos. Many of them are suffering from diseases, and a few are suspects. We need to keep them together until they fully recover and pass the screening. End of this chapter. Chapter 582. Did she do it? So that's the case, Pete said, his expression clearing. In that case, please ask Director Andre to arrange it. As the Minister of Magic, I must personally express my condolences to the victims. Pete's eagerness to visit the victims wasn't just about showing sympathy. He wanted to uncover the real experiences of the wizards in the park and gauge the situation of the cooperative wizards. Many of these wizards had previously been members of non-governmental organizations that supported the secession bill, adding fuel to the flames. Although most were unaware of the connection between these organizations and the high-level Ministry of Magic, those who did know had taken strict confidentiality measures. However, if these cooperating wizards confessed, it would be easy to link them to Pete's faction. Even without conclusive evidence, such confessions could have a significant negative impact on Pete and his allies. From the information Pete had gathered from newspapers, there was no relevant description of the situation. It was unclear whether the wizards were afraid to come forward or if they were being hidden. Pete's priority now was to minimize losses and ensure the split bill's implementation wasn't hindered. Andre, however, was well aware of Pete's intentions. The reason for detaining those people together was to prevent the club from exploiting these witnesses. With an apologetic smile, Andre said, "I'm very sorry, Minister Pete. Those wizards are in very poor physical and mental condition. Many have been brainwashed into fools by those hateful silver spears. They wouldn't even recognize you, so a visit is not advisable. I have already contacted the Wizengamot Council. A hearing on this incident will be held tomorrow. Representatives of the victims will be present. If you have anything to say, you can address them in person at the hearing." A hearing tomorrow? So soon? Pete was startled and felt a bad premonition. He insisted on meeting the victims in person, at least to offer condolences to the two heroes. But Andre, trained by Anduin, skillfully deflected Pete's requests, essentially saying no way. Seeing Andre's sudden smooth and nonchalant attitude, Pete's face grew ugly. With Andre blocking his path, Pete had no choice but to leave the Department of Legal Enforcement. However, he didn't give up. Pete, known for his cautious nature, was disturbed by the lack of information. He didn't know who the enemy was or what the rescued wizards knew. With this anxiety, Pete visited several Wizengamot counselors, including Edmund of the Schmidt family. But these individuals either asked questions like him or deflected his inquiries like Andre. Edmund even refused to see him. To Pete, it seemed that within a day, he was isolated by all the high-level officials of the Ministry of Magic. Even Michelle and other high-level directors who were loyal to him couldn't get any information. At this moment, Pete felt as if an invisible hand was slowly tightening around him, ready to squeeze him still. No, that hidden hand is probably after me, Pete thought. He wasn't a fool and realized the seriousness of the problem. But how bad was the situation? Different scenarios required different preparations, but the trouble now was that they couldn't obtain information from any channels other than newspapers. Was the civil society issue out, or was there... Pete's mind raced with possibilities. Could their connection to the club have been leaked, or, in the worst-case scenario, had the identities of him, Michelle, and the others been discovered? Impossible. Pete shook his head decisively, dismissing the thought. Among the wizards in the park, Claremont was the only one who knew his identity. Pete had confidence in Claremont's loyalty. Even if Claremont wanted to leak the secret, he couldn't. His brain was bound by an extremely strict magical contract. If the worst-case scenario was ruled out, then perhaps the activities of their civil society organization had been exposed, linking them to separatists. After considering it, Pete concluded that this could explain why the members of the Wizengamot were treating him so indifferently. If that was the case, the situation wasn't irreversible. The cooperating wizards couldn't provide any actual evidence. As long as they offered substantial profits to the members of the Wizengamot, they could surely cover up the matter. However, Pete was puzzled by the Schmidt family's stance. Their cooperation had always been good, but now they didn't even want to see him face to face. While Pete was frowning, trouble was also brewing at the Golden Snidget, the headquarters of the Silver Spear. What's going on with Phoenix? It's her safe period these days, so why hasn't she replied to any messages? Jin Facia paced back and forth in the living room of the headquarters, muttering to himself irritably. He had come to the headquarters early in the morning and initiated an emergency contact with all the spears through the mask. Many of the spears had responded, but Phoenix, whom he was sure he could contact, had disappeared, causing Jin Facia to frown. Could it be that Phoenix has returned to France? If the distance is too far, there will be a long delay in using the mask to communicate, and if it's too far away, it might be almost impossible to contact her. The fire ash snake suggested, looking at Jin Snidget with doubt. Impossible. I communicated with her just 2 days ago, and she was supposed to be in Germany assisting with the situation in East Germany. Jin Facia shook his head decisively. By the way, is there any news from the Wicked Bird? Didn't they use owls to contact us 2 days ago? Theoretically, they should be close to Germany and should be able to contact us with masks. This was a technical limitation of the club's communication methods. Since the location of the Wicked Bird was too remote, they could only use more traditional communication methods besides using the door key. There is still no news. Fire Ash Snake shook his head helplessly. Neither the owl nor the mask can contact them. Should we send someone to look for them? Let the shape-shifting lizard go, Snidget sighed helplessly. If there's a problem with the goods from Northern Europe, then we're in serious trouble. What's going on recently? Why is the club facing one problem after another? Fire Ash Snake also looked worried, but then he suddenly paused. Someone's at the gate of the headquarters. It's Thunderbird. Oh, I didn't expect him to be the first to respond. That's rare. Hurry up and bring him in. Jin Facia raised his eyebrows in surprise. Could this rebellious guy be more reliable than expected? A moment later, the furious Thunderbird kicked open the door of the reception room and rushed in. What do you mean by the emergency contact you sent? Have the people and magical animals who were robbed from the park been found? Or have you found the mastermind behind the scenes? What do you mean? Don't you read the newspapers every day? Jin Facia replied irritably, throwing the morning newspaper at Thunderbird. Those aurors were rescued from the Silver Spear? Thunderbird was visibly startled after reading the headline. What do you mean? Did you arrange for people to rescue them? Transfer those parks? Do you think I have nothing better to do? Jin Facia snapped, clearly frustrated. Even the Thunderbird seemed to suspect him, which only fueled his anger. It's obvious that something unusual is going on here. Why can't you see that? Unusual? Are you suggesting that someone impersonated us to attack those parks? Thunderbird's eyes widened in sudden realization. Then the culprit must have a vested interest in this. Could it be Andre from the Ministry of Magic, or perhaps the Schmidt family? But that doesn't seem realistic. Thunderbird paused, sensing something amiss. Just arranging these people is troublesome enough, not to mention hiding thousands of magical animals. Didn't you investigate them recently? Did you find anything unusual? That's exactly what Strang. Golden Snidget replied, equally puzzled. I've conducted thorough investigations on both Andre and the local wizard families in Germany, especially focusing on personnel transfers. They all behaved quite normally. This means that the wizards guarding the parks aren't their people. If they're not theirs, then whose are they? Could they be ours? Thunderbird muttered, still confused. Suddenly a thought struck him. Could it be? Exactly. Jin Facia realized Thunderbird had caught on. I'm afraid this was orchestrated by someone within our own club. Otherwise, it would be impossible to transfer so many people so smoothly and silently. The person capable of all this must be someone who knows these parks well and has enough people under their command, preferably not locals. Thunderbird mused aloud. Then he looked up sharply at Jin Facia. Where's Phoenix? When will she arrive? These past 2 days should be her safe period, so she should respond to you, right? Jin Facia sighed in frustration. I haven't been able to contact Phoenix at all. Logically, she should be in Germany. Could it be her? Is that possible? Thunderbird clutched the newspaper in his hand excitedly. Why would Phoenix have any reason to do this? Could it be that her research has led to a breakthrough in reversing the elixir formula? End of this chapter. Chapter 583. The first move is stronger. Following Thunderbird's subconscious murmur, Jin Facia's heart skipped a beat. That's right. Phoenix has been researching the mystery of eternal life for many years. This is something that all the veterans know. Could it be that her research has already yielded results? Reversing the formula of the elixir. Is it possible? If this is the case, it is very possible for Phoenix to sweep away all the magical animals collected by the club over the years and keep them for herself. If she is alone, the current reserve of magical animals is enough for her to be self-sufficient. And with Phoenix's abilities, coupled with her understanding of several parks, it is indeed possible for her to ransack all the parks silently. It might really be a coincidence that those aurors were able to find the imprisoned wizard in the park. Jin Feixia followed this line of thought, and the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. At the same time, the more he thought about it, the more chilling it became. If this was really done by Phoenix, then it would be difficult for them to recover those magical animals. Gold Snidget? Gold Snidget! Seeing that Jin Feixia was stunned in place without saying a word, Thunderbird couldn't help shouting at him irritably. Ah? Jin Feixia was now a little confused by his deduction. I'm afraid these things are really related to Phoenix. We have to find a way to locate her as soon as possible. Find her? How do you propose we do that? If Phoenix really wants to hide, can you find her? Thunderbird waved his hand irritably. The thing to worry about now is what to do next. How long can the club last with that batch of goods? Asked by Thunderbird, Jin Feixia couldn't help but respond with a guilty conscience. We can't get in touch with the Wicked Bird team now. What? Thunderbird was furious. What the hell are you doing? Didn't you already send people to support them? I lost so many people. Do you know how much effort it took to get them out of Northern Europe? After finishing, Thunderbird asked eagerly, Tell me honestly, does Phoenix know the transportation route of that batch of goods? I mentioned it to her. Jin Feixia suddenly became nervous. Could it be that Phoenix didn't even spare the Wicked Bird team? That's troublesome. Thunderbird sighed and shouted at Jin Feixia angrily. Even if the Wicked Birds and the others disappear into thin air now, I wouldn't be surprised, you idiot. Don't be so excited. Jin Feixia's mind was also in a mess. The most important thing now is to stabilize the situation and survive this difficulty. These park wizards rescued by the aurors are also very troublesome. It may have a huge impact on our overall European strategy. Then what do you think we should do? Thunderbird paused, then said in a cold tone, Why don't we just kill them and get rid of all these hundreds of wizards? Are you crazy? How could they be unprepared? Doing so will arouse public outrage, not only in Germany, but maybe it will also attract the attention of the entire wizarding world. Jin Feixia was taken aback by Thunderbird's remarks. The guy really doesn't think it's a big deal. In this case, we have to attack other spears. Thunderbird looked at Jin Feixia leisurely. The first thing we need to do now is to save our lives. What do you mean? Jin Feixia felt the murderous intent implied in Thunderbird's words. Is it necessary to do this? This is self-destruction. Then tell me, where should we get the elixir after one season? Thunderbird didn't hide his thoughts. In short, every time one more person distributes the elixir, our time will be tighter. Do you have a way to get the ingredients in a short time? Jin Feixia hesitated. For a moment, he knew Thunderbird was right, but it was still very difficult to make such a determination. Also, Thunderbird added, have you confirmed the situation on the Rune Snake side? Have you considered that this incident might be orchestrated by him? Furthermore, if he knows the current state of the club, how can you guarantee he won't abandon us and run away? Thunderbird's words sent a chill through Jin Feixia's heart. The possibility was indeed there. With Rune Snake's selfish personality, knowing that the club had lost most of its raw material sources, would he still continue to supply the elixir? It seemed unlikely. All right, Jin Feixia decided. First, we'll deal with those spears. Then, I'll find a way to meet Rune Snake. As long as he agrees, we'll go find him together. Remember, don't tell him the current situation of the club for now. We don't want him to flee, Thunderbird cautioned. Understood. I'm not an idiot, Jin Feixia replied, feeling a bit dejected. He then turned to look at the fire ash snake next to him. I noticed you seemed hesitant earlier. Did someone else arrive at the headquarters? It's Acromantula. She has just issued an entry application. You need to hurry up with what you need to do, Fire Ash Snake replied, having observed the conversation between Jin Feixia and Thunderbird. Although he was alarmed by their decision, he didn't object, as it also concerned his situation. Okay, then I'll do it, Thunderbird said coldly. He drew out his wand, tapped himself, and gradually melted into the air. Fire Ash Snake showed no reaction to this and left the reception room, while Jinfacia pretended to sit on the sofa. When Fire Ash Snake returned, he was accompanied by Acromantula with a silver spear. Golden Snidget, what's going on? This kind of emergency contact signal hasn't been used in over 10 years. Have those magical animals disappeared? Acromantula asked, having rushed over from Italy to understand what had happened. Don't mention anything else. I just want to ask you one thing now. The whereabouts of the phoenix. Jinfacia suppressed his anxiety and looked at Acromantula coldly. Phoenix? How would I know about her situation? Why did you call us here in such a hurry? Although Acromantula had a good relationship with Phoenix, as a spear, everyone kept their secrets. Phoenix has lost contact. It's very likely she was behind the attack on the park. Jinfacia stared at the giant eight-eyed spider, trying to discern any clues. Impossible. Why would Phoenix do this? Acromantula was surprised. Could it be that her research on immortality has yielded results? I don't know. The most important thing now is to find Phoenix. Can you contact her? Jinfacia's tone was extremely calm, as if he was hiding something. Acromantula shook her head without hesitation. I'm not her nanny. How could I communicate with her so frequently? Even normally, we wouldn't— Suddenly, Acromantula felt a sharp pain in her chest. Looking down, she saw a scarlet magic blade piercing through her. The attacker was none other than Thunderbird, who had been lurking nearby. This is— Acromantula stared at Jinfacia in disbelief, then turned to Thunderbird. She hadn't expected these two to suddenly attack her at the headquarters. The Acromantula, full of astonishment, could only wonder what had led to this betrayal. Rage was about to explode within him, but the Snidget in front of him raised his wand without a word and cast Avada Kedavra at her at close range. In an instant, the colleague who had worked with them for many years and had been part of the Saint Party was killed on the spot. After completing this cruel and despicable sneak attack, Snidget and Thunderbird tidied up the scene efficiently and silently. Thunderbird was responsible for collecting the spoils, while Snidget cleaned up the blood. Once Thunderbird finished searching, the Fire Ash Snake took the corpse of the Acromantula spider and carried it inside. Throughout the entire process, the three of them remained silent and indifferent. This is her elixir. It's exactly 1.5 bottles. The three of us can each have a share, Thunderbird, who was in charge of cleaning up the relics, said as he took out 2 crystal bottles from the space props of the Acroman, Tula. He kept the half bottle for himself and tossed the whole bottle to Golden Snidget. Divide these 2 among yourselves. Golden Snidget nodded indifferently. The death of a former colleague did not evoke any guilt or uneasiness in him. After all, it was related to their wealth and survival. They needed to act quickly before the news got out. Once the rest of the Spears learned about the problems with the raw materials of the park and the Wicked Bird, they might turn against them. However, he knew that continuing like this was not a viable option. Even if they disposed of the rest of the Spears, the recovered potions would only last 2 or 3 years. They needed to develop new sources of raw materials. Thinking of this, Golden Snidget pinned his remaining hopes on the Ministry of Magic. As for the lost ingredients and revenge on the culprit, Golden Snidget was no longer impulsive. He knew that acting recklessly would only increase casualties. The opponent was targeting the club and must be prepared. Don't just stand there. This is only the first one. We still have work to do, and we don't know how many more potions we can recover today. Thunderbird interrupted Golden Snidget's train of thought, nodding in the direction of Fire Ash Snake. The Fire Ash Snake had sensed that someone was applying to enter the headquarters again, obviously another response to an urgent summons. I understand. Let's continue. Golden Snidget nodded indifferently. Today is our best and last chance. When the news spreads tomorrow, they will be prepared. End of this chapter. Chapter 584, The Hearing. While the German wizarding world was abuzz with Andre's recent exploits, a fratricidal drama was unfolding within the Silver Spear Club, which found itself inexplicably blamed for various misdeeds. On this particular day, Thunderbird and Golden Snidget launched a surprise attack in the reception room of the headquarters, effortlessly killing 3 members to secure their own positions. In an organization as seemingly harmless yet inherently selfish as the Silver Spear, collapse was inevitable. Even those dedicated to the club's development would not hesitate to draw their weapons when personal interests were at stake. Given the opportunity, the remaining members would likely make the same choice. Jin Feishia, who had been busy all day, was now exhausted and slumped on the sofa. He couldn't comprehend what had gone wrong. Why had a series of unfortunate events plagued the club over the past month, bringing it to the brink of collapse? However, he had no time to dwell on these thoughts. Tomorrow's hearing was the most significant challenge he faced. He could already foresee that his opponents would attack him on the grounds of civil society affairs. Pete, calculating the power he currently wielded, noted that the 3 directors of magic and a large number of management wizards under them represented more than half of the Ministry of Magic's resources. With their support, unsubstantiated accusations would not shake his foundation. As for the judges in the Wizengamot, Pete viewed them as opportunists who would side with whoever appeared stronger. Despite the indifference of the wizard families towards him, they had not dared to oppose him directly, indicating they were still playing it safe. Perhaps due to the immense pressure he was under, Pete remained optimistic. Anduin's plan had compressed every step into a tight schedule. The people rescued yesterday would be tried in public tomorrow, giving Jin Snidget little time to react. The confidentiality work had been executed flawlessly, adding to Jin Feishia's unease, though he did not seem to be in the worst situation. The next day, at the Ministry of Magic, Pete arrived early, a copy of the day's newspaper in front of him. The headlines were still focused on the wizards in the park, detailing the many grievances and tortures suffered by the victims in prison and severely denouncing the cruelty of the Silver Spear. The club's reputation in Germany was undoubtedly tarnished, making it difficult to recruit new members under its name. However, Pete felt helpless in the face of this situation. The club was not an above-board organization, and there was no way to refute the accusations. Any attempt to defend the club would likely result in public outrage. As he pondered his predicament, Michelle knocked on his door. "My lord, the public inquiry hearing is about to begin, and the location is in the first courtroom." "Understood." Pete immediately adopted a solemn expression and instructed Michelle, "Make sure to call the major and minor supervisors of each department. We need to face this challenge together." "Don't worry, I've already notified everyone. They are your solid backing and won't let this incident negatively impact you," Michelle reassured him. "Well, let's go." Pete nodded, feeling slightly relieved. When Pete stepped out of the minister's office, dozens of wizards had already gathered outside his door, including the chief and deputy directors of the 3 magic divisions, as well as the heads and directors of the subordinate offices, various departments. He then took the lead, guiding the group to the first trial room with a commanding presence. This was his way of demonstrating his influence to everyone. When they arrived at the courtroom, it was already packed with people, including all the judges of the Wizengamot, representatives of major wizarding families, Anduin, and a large number of media reporters. Everyone in the courtroom was secretly surprised to see Pete leading such a large group. This was more than half of the minis, Try of Magic's management. The representatives of the wizard families looked at Edmund with some guilt. The strength Pete displayed made them question whether they should really oppose him this time. However, Edmund and Andre remained calm, as if they had anticipated this. Edmund even took a moment to glance at the family representatives, giving them a reassuring look. Pete, facing the formidable assembly, maintained his composure, smiling warmly as he leisurely took a seat in front of the rostrum. The courtroom proceedings were always presided over by the Department of Legal Enforcement. Even the minister had to watch from the sidelines. Once everyone was seated, the courtroom, now packed, fell into an oppressive silence. The atmosphere was so tense that even the reporters dared not make a sound. Andre glanced around before standing in front of the trial stand and loudly announcing, "Since everyone is here, let's get started." This consultation hearing is to understand the real situation of a vicious captivity incident involving wizards and muggles that occurred the day before yesterday. It is not a formal trial, so please don't be too nervous, and do not interfere with the inquiries. Despite Andre's attempt at humor, many people rolled their eyes. With the current tension in the trial hall, telling them not to be nervous seemed like a joke. Ignoring their reactions, Andre continued, I announce that this public inquiry on the vicious imprisonment of 537 wizards and muggles has officially started. The first party is invited, Simon Nathan. Following Andre's call, a door next to the circular courtroom opened, and Nathan, now dressed formally, walked out. As an ordinary wizard, this was his first time seeing such a scene. All the wizards in their elaborate costumes sat on the circular high platform like a lecture hall, while he stood alone in the middle. This made him a bit nervous. After Nathan stood still, Andre smiled at him. Today is just to understand the situation with you. Please don't be nervous. Now, please tell us your name, where you are from, and your previous job. Yes, Director Andre, Nathan shouted excitedly, causing many to chuckle and making him blush. He continued, I am Simon Nathan, from West Berlin, graduated from Beauxbatons Academy of Magic and used to work in an unknown breeding park. Andre nodded. Okay, please tell us the whole process of your illegal imprisonment, starting from the day you realized you were imprisoned. Yes, Nathan, calmed by Andre's steady voice, began to recount in detail. That day, I was resting in the dormitory at the park when my residence was suddenly broken into by 2 silver spears. Then, Nathan detailed everything that happened to him, the attack, the imprisonment, what he saw and heard in prison, and how he decided to escape, including the entire escape process. Upon escaping, Nathan's encounter with Andre and the others was clearly explained. Initially, he was a bit nervous and stumbled over his words, but he quickly adapted. Since these were recent experiences, he recounted them vividly, making everyone present feel as if they were right there with him. After hearing Nathan's detailed description, many in the audience were overwhelmed by his bravery and felt a sincere disgust for the silver spears. Initially, many had dismissed the exaggerated content in the newspapers, but the reality Nathan described was even more outrageous. The cruelty of the silver spears was beyond what anyone had imagined. Finally, with the help of Mr. Wilson, I successfully returned to the prison with Director Andre and others. Under Director Andre's leadership, after a hard fight, we rescued the rest of our companions. Many of them are still recovering, and we owe our freedom to Director Andre, Director Schmidt, Mr. Wilson, and the Aurors, Nathan concluded. At the end of his speech, Nathan bowed deeply to Andre on the high platform. The wizards watching couldn't help but give a warm round of applause, including Pete, whose enthusiastic clapping suggested he was genuinely moved by Nathan's deeds. I just did what I should do as the director of the Department of Legal Enforcement. You should really be grateful to yourselves. Without the heroic actions of you and Bob, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to help, Andre said, smiling reassuringly. Then he turned serious again. However, we need you to explain some details from your account. Let's start with your previous work. You mentioned working in an unknown breeding park. Can you explain that in detail? Hearing Andre's question, everyone immediately focused on Nathan in the center of the venue. Peter's heart skipped a beat, knowing this was a crucial moment. Yes, Nathan began. No one had prepped him before he came, so he felt no psychological pressure. He simply answered Andre's questions as best as he could. End of this chapter. Chapter 585, The Appearance of Big Mouth, Seeking Recommendations and Monthly Tickets. The breeding park I work in is located in West Germany, but we don't know the exact location at all. We only know that the internal staff are all from West Germany, and the manager is Mr. Claremont, Nathan said after a moment of pondering. There are hundreds of magical animals in the park. Our daily work is to take care of them. I am a member of the maintenance team. There is also a medical team that manages the health of the magical zoo area, and a patrol team that is responsible for the security of the park. Every time we have to work in the park for at least half a year, our memory will be erased, and we will be sent out of the park after the period expires. We return to work in the park after a period of rest outside. I have had this experience for several years. So, you don't know the details of that park at all? Then, how did you get recruited into the park, and didn't you have any doubts about the nature of the park? Andre asked, his curiosity piqued. If you want to talk about doubts, we did have some. But the explanation given to us by the park was that the breeding of magical animals for some big companies needs to be done in secret. The remuneration paid there is indeed very generous, so we all accepted this explanation, Nathan said with some embarrassment. As for how I joined the park, I was introduced by the West German Endeavor Association. As far as I know, many people in the park also came into contact with the park in this way. Nathan continued after a pause. The members of the patrol team in our park are basically members of the West German Endeavor Association, and the manager, His Excellency Claremont, is the main person in charge of the organization. We West Germans used to have a lot of trust in these community groups, so we didn't get too entangled. I see, Andre nodded, but what do you mean by used to? Why do you no longer trust those civil organizations? That's right, Nathan said, his expression suddenly indignant. After being imprisoned by those silver spear guns, we learned that the owner behind these breeding parks is the Silver Spear, and those community groups are very close to the club. Even the wizards from these groups made no secret of this, directly admitting that they have actually been serving the club all the time. They even boasted to us in prison, saying that they provoked the friction between East and West Germany. Most civil organizations in East and West Germany are secretly funded and instructed by the club. Nathan's emotions became agitated as he cursed the Silver Spear and the West German Endeavor Society. His speech also caused heated discussions among many wizards around. Although they had heard some rumors, they were still very surprised to hear the news directly. The fact that civil society members in East and West Germany were the same group as the members of the club's secret base was shocking. Now, it was even directly related to the conflict between East and West Germany in the past 10 years. The implications were enormous. I protest. Just as everyone was whispering, a voice suddenly sounded from the spectators. This kind of empty accusation cannot be used as a basis at all. Those wizards are under the pressure of being imprisoned, and occasionally a few people will speak nonsense. It's normal. The major civic organizations in Germany not only have a long history, but also have a great reputation. You can't draw conclusions in vain just by listening to some people's nonsense. As everyone turned to see who had spoken, they found it was the director of the Department of Magical Beast Management and Control. Matt Rorayamon, an official of the East German Office of Beasts, Aliens, and Ghosts, and also a representative of the Ministry of Magic, reacted strongly to Nathan's rhetoric. No, Nathan exclaimed in desperation, retorting loudly. It's not just one or two people saying this. There are hundreds of people in the prison, and nearly 100 of them are members of those groups. Many people have the same rhetoric. Doesn't that explain the problem? That's hard to say, Matt snorted coldly. And now it's just your statement. Who knows if you were instructed by someone to talk nonsense? Matt glanced at Andre on the stage intentionally, making his meaning very clear. What I said is absolutely the truth. I am willing to swear. Nathan, agitated by Matt's words, swore with a curse on the spot. The people around began to look at Matt more playfully. They were not fools. Everyone had their own judgment on whether Nathan's words were credible. Even Pete in the front row glanced at Matt in dissatisfaction. Although he knew Matt was protecting his own interests, attacking witnesses at this time was simply stupid. How could Michelle send this idiot to speak? As the argument grew fiercer, Andre on the rostrum knocked vigorously on the gavel in his hand. Silence! He commanded. Once everyone quieted down, Andre said calmly, Now is the question time, not for you to quarrel. He glared at Matt coldly. Matt, don't attack the person with your words, or you will have to leave. Matt felt guilty under Andre's stare, and Pete was also signaling him to calm down. Andre then turned his attention back to Nathan. Of course, it's really arbitrary to accuse all major civil society groups of colluding with the club based on your own words. Nathan, step down. We will continue to listen to what other victims have to say. Nathan, wanting to argue further, was quickly stopped by Andre's stern look and withdrew from the hall, visibly dissatisfied. Pete, observing Andre's seemingly fair stance, felt a mix of surprise and concern. He thought to himself, this guy is either truly impartial or has enough confidence in his position. Now, please invite the next person, Matthew Dern, Andre called out. Another young wizard entered the hall. The subsequent inquiry process was similar to Nathan's. Matthew, a member of the patrol team from Park Number 1 and the nephew of Claremont, provided a brief description. His account was similar to Nathan's, except he had stayed in the prison waiting for rescue. Matthew, you said you are a member of the patrol team in the breeding park. Can you briefly describe your work? Andre asked in his usual flat tone. Matthew, more fluent in his conversation than Nathan, responded, Yes, sir. Our patrol team is divided into 2 shifts daily, responsible for guarding inside and outside the protective cover to prevent people from accidentally entering or attacking the park. I initially handled internal patrols and was later promoted to the external patrol team. The park even equipped us with advanced equipment. What do you mean by preventing someone from attacking? Andre asked unhurriedly. Matthew, who was usually carefree, blurted out, Of course, it is to prevent the Department of Law Enforcement from attacking. My uncle, His Excellency Claremont, specifically told us to contact Aurors. As soon as we find him, we should retreat into the protective cover. With the park's protective power, even dozens of Aurors won't be able to get in for a while. Then why were you captured so easily? Andre asked with a smile. I didn't know the park would be breached from the inside. Matthew shrugged helplessly. The park we belong to is under the control of the Silver Spear Lords. Who would have thought they would attack their own place? Even in prison, they tried to brainwash us into idiots to keep working for them. Matthew's words caused an uproar. Even the patrol members admitted that their main messenger was the club. With 2 consecutive parties saying the same thing, the facts were becoming very clear. The wizards of Peter's faction grew anxious upon hearing this, but before they could refute, they felt Andre's stern gaze. Silence, Andre commanded, maintaining order in the hall. He then turned his attention back to Matthew. You said those breeding parks belong to the Silver Spear Club. Do you have any evidence? The core members of our West German Endeavor Society are aware of this. I wasn't originally qualified to know this secret, but my uncle Claremont is the leader of the Endeavor Society, so I had access to this information. I know a lot about the dealings between the club and the park, such as... Matthew began to speak eloquently, detailing how the club handed over magical animals, the park's mode of operation, his work experience in the Endeavor Society and the black market, and how his uncle Claremont manipulated the West German Endeavor Society to cause trouble. In fact, Matthew hadn't participated in everything, but he had a knack for gossip. He knew a little about everything and was very good at piecing things together. He was always in the know. Speaking of which, the people with the Silver Spear are really ruthless. My uncle worked for them for so many years, and he ended up like this. Matthew couldn't help but sigh at the end. Matthew's vivid narration captivated everyone in the trial hall. They couldn't help but think that if he hadn't worked with the club, he would have made an excellent talk show host. End of this chapter. Chapter 586, The Revelation. At this moment, a group of people wore expressions that were far from pleasant, particularly the executives of the Ministry of Magic aligned with Pete's faction. Their carefully laid plans were unraveling. Even Pete, seated in the audience, glared at Matthew with a livid face, silently cursing Claremont. Where did his nephew come from, and how did he know everything? Fortunately, Pete's psychological resilience held firm, preventing an outburst on the spot. He surmised that Matthew was likely Andre's trump card. The appearance of this individual had indeed made him uneasy. However, Pete managed to breathe a sigh of relief. If this was the extent of the revelations, he could still manage. Meanwhile, Andre, standing at the rostrum, was equally taken aback. He hadn't anticipated that Matthew would possess such a wealth of information. No matter the question, Matthew had a ready answer. Andre noticed that much of what Matthew said aligned with current intelligence, making it seem more like boasting. Yet, Matthew's words carried a provocative undertone that couldn't be ignored. Andre couldn't help but admire Anduin's foresight. Matthew had been recommended by Anduin as a witness, and Andre had initially thought it was merely a formality. The actual impact was surprisingly effective. After listening to Matthew's spirited speech, Andre posed another question, focusing on a crucial detail. You mentioned earlier that the park provided you with advanced equipment. What exactly is this equipment? Matthew, now more relaxed, responded without hesitation. The advanced equipment refers to tactical vests. These vests are remarkable. They offer comprehensive protection and can automatically activate the full-body armor curse. These are rare alchemical items produced by Silver Flash Trading Company, and they are not available to the general public. Oh, is that so? Andre turned to look at Anduin in the audience. Mr. Wilson, is the equipment Matthew mentioned your creation? That's correct, Anduin nodded, not denying it. The tactical vest is indeed a product of Silver Flash Trading Company. However, it is classified as an XX-level item, and we only authorize its sale to reputable large institutions like the British Ministry of Magic. I am unsure how Matthew's park acquired such equipment. Andre frowned slightly and questioned Anduin further. According to Matthew, they possess 5 tactical vests. Presumably, the other 2 parks are similarly equipped. Such a quantity is significant. Do you have any sales records? Well, yes, Anduin replied, tilting his head thoughtfully before offering a wry smile. However, large orders of tactical vests are rare. To my knowledge, the German Ministry of Magic purchased more than a dozen sets, which is the only significant export. Other regions combined have not bought as many. Oh, that's peculiar. As the director of the law enforcement department, I have never heard of the dozen or so sets you mentioned, Andre remarked, raising his eyebrows in surprise. The exchange between the individuals did not incite the intense discussion that had previously filled the trial hall. Instead, a heavy silence fell over the room. The implications were clear to everyone present. If Anduin and Matthew's statements were accurate, it suggested that someone within the Ministry of Magic had provided these tactical vests to the club. This revelation, combined with the activities of the wizards controlled by the Silver Lance, hinted at a deeper connection between the club and certain individuals within the Ministry of Magic. Among those present, the Pit faction, which has long led the split bill, had the most at stake. Andre turned to Pete with a questioning look. Minister Pete, is what Mr. Wilson said true? Did the Ministry of Magic really order this equipment? The rest of the attendees also focused their attention on Pete, while the reporters eagerly pointed their cameras at him, sensing a potential scandal. Pete's expression was stiff. He hadn't expected to be caught off guard by these questions. However, he maintained his composure and replied in a calm tone, I'm sorry, but I really don't know anything about this. The responsibility for purchasing equipment from outside the Ministry of Magic isn't solely mine. Exactly, Matt interjected, standing next to Pete. What can some equipment prove? Just because the quantity purchased by the Ministry of Magic is similar to those held by the Silver Spear guns, are you going to suspect Minister Pete? Moreover, the equipment Matthew mentioned isn't even visible now. How can you be sure these items are from the same batch? Couldn't someone have imitated them based on Silver Flash Trading Company's products? Or perhaps the club obtained them through smuggling channels. They are, after all, a bunch of smugglers. It's not unusual. Matt added, glancing disdainfully at Anduin. For all we know, some people might be greedy for profit and have taken the initiative to smuggle and resell it. Initially, Pete appreciated Matt's defense, thinking he was adept at diverting attention. But when Matt's last comment implied Anduin's involvement, Pete silently cursed him as an idiot. Anduin was clearly just observing the situation, and Matt's unnecessary provocation was only making enemies. Sure enough, Anduin's expression darkened at Matt's insinuation. What do you mean by that? Are you accusing me of illegal trade? Heh, you're the one doing business. I don't know who you sell things to, Matt retorted, ignoring Michelle's attempts to pull him back. It seems someone here wants to create something out of nothing. Anduin stood up, addressing everyone around him with a sneer. As the person in charge of Silver Flash Trading Company, I can assure you all that our company has always prioritized credibility. First of all, high-risk equipment like tactical vests is strictly controlled in the UK. Every piece sold is meticulously recorded. If there's any mistake, the British Ministry of Magic will hold us accountable. Secondly, although the price of tactical vests is high, the cost is also significant, leaving little profit. I have no reason to waste effort reselling such equipment. Wouldn't it be more profitable for me to sell more magic lamps and magic phonographs? Anduin continued, glaring at Matt. Do you know how many civilian alchemy products my company sells in a quarter? The sales of tactical equipment account for less than 10% of our total sales. Why would I risk everything for a mere few thousand galleons? It's absurd. Anduin boldly scanned the room. I can make a promise here. If anyone can provide real evidence of illegal reselling, smuggling, or even product quality issues, you can directly complain to me. If it's proven true, I will pay 3,000 galleons in cash on the spot. With that, Anduin pulled out a heavy leather bag, emphasizing his point. Anduin slammed the bag onto the table with a resounding bang. The dazzling light from the bag's opening revealed it was filled with gold galleons. His aggressive demeanor immediately intimidated everyone present. Internally, they all gave Anduin a thumbs up, thinking, this guy is the real deal. None of them had ever seen someone throw cash around so brazenly. Anduin's display of wealth convinced everyone that the equipment held by the club couldn't have come from Silver Flash Trading Company. They were renowned alchemists with enough money to flaunt. Why would they bother with petty smuggling? Even Matt, who had been loudly accusing before, shrank back in fear and sat down, embarrassed. Annoyed by Matt's behavior, Anduin declared, also, the claim that the tactical vest Mr. Matt mentioned was copied is baseless. As an alchemist, I can confirm that the equipment Matthew described is indeed the tactical vest sold by our Silver Flash Trading Company. My work is not easily imitated. He then produced an actual tactical vest and tossed it onto the stage. Matthew, is this the kind of equipment you used before? Matthew examined the vest carefully and nodded. Yes, that's right. Even the style is exactly the same, and it has the Silver Flash Trading Company's longsword badge on it. Exactly, Anduin continued. To imitate this level of craftsmanship, one would need to be a master alchemist, and the cost would exceed mine. To further emphasize his point, Anduin added, I can assure you, if anyone can reproduce a finished product with the same appearance and function, I will buy it at the selling price, no questions asked. Anduin's professional assertion made it clear that the equipment used in the breeding park was indeed produced by Silver Flash Trading Company. This strongly suggested, with a high probability, that this batch of equipment had come from the Ministry of Magic. Andre turned to Pete with a playful look. Since Mr. Wilson has made his point, I'm afraid Minister Pete needs to provide an explanation. And let's not forget these non-governmental organizations. You must be familiar with them, right? End of this chapter. Chapter 587, Good Means, Seeking a Monthly Ticket Recommendation. I'm sorry, but as I mentioned before, I don't know anything about the source of that equipment, Pete insisted, knowing that admitting to these allegations would ruin his reputation. As for those folk groups, my relationship with them is purely professional. Pete glanced around the room. The folk groups in the German magic circle have a long history. They were active in various wizarding communities long before I became the Minister of Magic. Many people here have had interactions with them. It doesn't mean that everyone who has crossed paths with them is guilty. If that were the case, many of us would be implicated. While Pete's argument seemed reasonable, it didn't satisfy the crowd. Indeed, as Pete said, many people in the German wizarding community had connections with these folk groups. However, these connections did not necessarily involve any wrongdoing. Andre, unfazed by Pete's rhetoric, responded firmly, That's true, but your explanation is not convincing. We now know that these civil groups have been corrupted by the Silver Spear. In addition to using the manpower of non-governmental organizations to operate the breeding park for profit, they also conspired to instigate the division of East and West Germany. It's hard to ignore such actions. The alchemy equipment provided to the club indicates that high-level members of the Ministry of Magic have connections with the club. As the Minister of Magic, your ignorance of this matter itself represents a dereliction of duty. You need to take responsibility. Andre's words resonated with the crowd, who nodded in agreement. This incident was extremely serious and had shocked the entire German magical world. If it spread, it could even become an international scandal, making the German wizarding community a laughingstock. In such circumstances, someone had to be held accountable. Even if no one was directly at fault, someone had to take the blame. This was the nature of politics. Moreover, the separatist faction led by Pete was already under suspicion, and a few words wouldn't suffice to clear their names. The Wiesengemot judges would not be easily convinced. "What do you propose?" Pete sighed inwardly, realizing he couldn't escape unscathed today. He never imagined he would be cornered by Claremont's nephew. "It's very simple," Andre replied calmly. "As the official who directly promoted the Division Act, you and the other relevant senior officials are implicated in this case. Personally, I don't want to believe that you are connected with the criminals in the club, but we need to conduct an internal review of the relevant personnel. During this period, you and the others involved need to be temporarily dismissed until the truth comes to light. If you continue to deny any wrongdoing, I will initiate a motion for a vote in the Wiesengemot," Andre said, looking around at the counselors. The counselors, meeting his gaze, nodded in agreement. It was clear that there were infiltrators within the Ministry of Magic, and these individuals could not remain in their positions. The so-called dismissal review was just a polite way of saying they needed to step down temporarily. The officer faced dismissal, but could be reinstated after the investigation concluded. The review period could be lengthy, potentially lasting 3 to 7 years. Given the severity of the case involving Pete and his associates, a swift resolution seemed unlikely. Pete understood the gravity of the situation. Once implicated, he would be treated as a serious criminal. Pete's complexion turned pale as he glanced at Michelle across the room. Michelle, catching Pete's signal, felt a surge of desperation. He hadn't anticipated this turn of events, but he knew what he had to do. Despite his reluctance, he stood up and shouted, "Don't blame Minister Pete anymore. I did all of this. I'll take responsibility." Michelle's sudden confession caused an uproar. Even Andre looked at him in surprise. "What did you say?" Andre as Ked. "Isn't it clear? I did all of this. I colluded with the Silver Spear, manipulated public opinion through civil society groups, and used the Ministry of Magic's name to purchase tactical equipment. I acted alone," Michelle declared passionately. Andre's gaze deepened. "Do you understand the gravity of your confession? This is a serious crime, bordering on treason. Admitting to this means a life sentence in prison. There's no turning back," he warned, his tone softening. "Think carefully. If you were coerced, I can offer you a chance to repent. Don't make a hasty decision." "No one coerced me. As the director of the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters, no one could force me. I did these things, and I am ready to face any punishment." Michelle's eyes reddened as he continued. "But I want to make it clear that my actions were driven by a great ideal, not betrayal. The current discord in Germany isn't due to civil society infighting, but the irreconcilable differences between East and West Germany. This situation is a result of the incompetence of high-level officials. Instead of maintaining a country in pain, it's better to separate once and for all. Arrest him and take him away." Andre interrupted Michelle's tirade, signaling the aurors to restrain him. The courtroom scene left the observing wizards stunned. Many were shocked to learn that Michelle was behind the schemes. However, a significant number still focused on Pete, skeptical of Michelle's confession. They suspected Pete had orchestrated Michelle's statement to take the fall. Despite the skepticism, Michelle's confession removed the immediate suspicion from Pete, as there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crimes. Andre, with a grim expression, glanced at Pete. "You played a clever game. I'm genuinely curious. How did you convince Michelle to take the blame?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Director Andre," Pete replied with a sigh, his expression one of feigned sorrow. "I'm deeply saddened that Michelle would do such a thing. I had no idea. After working together for so long, I noticed the abnormalities in him. It's also my responsibility," Pete said. "Humph," Andre sneered. "Only a fool would believe your words." Andre hadn't expected Pete to use this method to exonerate himself. He had to admit they had underestimated each other. The chief of the first department was willing to sacrifice his freedom and reputation to take the fall. At this moment, Pete's heart was bleeding. What others didn't know was how much he had sacrificed to ensure his escape today. To secure Michelle's unwavering loyalty, Pete had provided him with the elixir in advance and promised to do everything possible to rescue him in the future. This agreement meant Pete had to continue supplying the medicine, or Michelle would undoubtedly turn against him and fight to the death. Essentially, Pete had handed over his leverage to Michelle, but he had no other choice. Fortunately, he had passed the test smoothly. The crime of colluding with clubs and provoking non-governmental organizations had been pinned on someone else, and his status remained secure for the time being. Although he knew his actions couldn't deceive everyone, he believed that as long as he paid enough, he could still win the support of the Wizengamot. Thinking of this, Pete felt a pang of distress, but maintained a calm expression as he urged Andre. "Director Andre, today's interrogation isn't over, right? Right? Please continue." Seeing Pete's composure, Andre couldn't help but sneer. "Don't worry, the next person won't disappoint you." "Silence," Andre shouted, restoring order in the room. "Although Michelle has been punished, the hearing will continue. Next, please invite the former owner of the Claremont Magic Supplies Store, Milan Claremont." The wizards around had thought today's farce was over, and that the rest was just a formality since the culprits had surrendered. But hearing a familiar name lifted everyone's spirits. Few locals in Germany didn't know Claremont and his magic sup, Ply the Shop. Chapter 588, Evidence. What? Claremont? Upon hearing the name, Pete couldn't help but tense up. Could it be that even Claremont was going to betray him? He hadn't expected the other party to appear for the questioning. However, Pete quickly reassured himself. Claremont didn't seem to pose much of a threat. After all, the man's brain had been subjected to a very harsh secrecy spell, and the information he could divulge might not be as significant as that of Matthew. Andre probably brought him in just to intimidate Pete. Thinking this, Pete gradually relaxed, his expression returning to calm. Andre, observing Pete's demeanor, sneered internally. Soon, Pete would know what true despair felt like. Claremont stepped into the trial hall through the side door. He wore a plain wizard robe, looking far less impressive than when he was the owner of a magic supply shop. "Claremont," Andre addressed the old man standing in the audience. "Everyone here knows your identity, so there's no need for introductions. I'm asking you now, do you know anything about the Silver Spear manipulating civil society organizations in Germany?" "I do, Lord Andre," Claremont replied calmly, despite the many eyes on him. "Not only do I know, but I am also the direct person in charge of the West German Endeavor Society. I coordinate and manage these institutions for the club and am considered a non-staff member of the Silver Spear." He admitted it so readily. The bystanders, whether Wizengamot counselors or Ministry of Magic executives sent by Pete, were secretly shocked by Claremont's frankness. The confession of a person directly in charge was far more powerful than that of low-level personnel. Would this deal a fatal blow to Pete? However, when everyone looked at Pete, they found him very calm, as if he wasn't worried about Claremont's testimony at all. "Very good," Andre continued, his face stern. "Please explain how your main work in these institutions is usually handed over to the Silver Spear." "I'm sorry, Director Andre, but I cannot fully recount the relevant content," Claremont replied expressionlessly. "What about the names? You've worked for the club for so long, you must know the names of many relevant personnel, such as those involved with the Silver Spear, the Black Market, and the West German Endeavor Association. Can you provide a list of known personnel?" Andre pressed on. "I'm sorry," Claremont shook his head coldly. "I can't say those names, not even one." "Why?" "In order to prevent leaks, my brain has been cast with a high-strength secrecy spell by the club, and I have also signed a contract. As long as I subconsciously know that I am leaking secrets, my behavior will be stopped by these magics. So, any information related to the club cannot be revealed," Claremont explained in a cold tone. "What? He can't say anything?" The wizards around murmured in disappointment. They had expected to hear some significant revelations, but Claremont was no different from a mute. However, They also gained a new understanding of the club's methods of controlling their wizards. No wonder the Silver Spear used such cruel methods of brainwashing. They had a long history of criminal convictions. It was no wonder Pete was so calm. He probably already knew that Claremont couldn't say a single useful word. The Ministry of Magic executives who were in the same camp as Pete couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. They had been genuinely afraid that Claremont would reveal something terrible. To everyone's surprise, Andre didn't show the slightest bit of frustration in the face of Claremont, who had nothing to say. Instead, he continued to ask, "Since you can't say anything about the club, do you have any evidence that can reveal the club's information?" "Yes, Director Andre," Claremont replied indifferently, instantly setting the entire trial hall ablaze with excitement. He just said yes, right? Quite a few people seemed to have not recovered their senses and kept asking their companions. After getting a definite answer, they immediately looked at Claremont with burning eyes. Even the reporters pointed their cameras and microphones at him as if they were waiting for some treasure to be revealed. The wizards of the split faction around looked nervously at Pete. It was impossible for them to say they were not afraid, but they wondered what evidence this guy had in his hands. At this time, Pete kept recalling, did Claremont really have any substantive evidence? Impossible. Pete resolutely denied this idea and then gently shook his head at his subordinates, telling them not to act rashly. What Andre and Claremont said was probably trying to scare them and force them to do something irrational. At this time, they must not mess around. The first Auror team stepped forward to protect the witness. Just when Pete hinted to those wizards not to act rashly, Andre gave a soft shout. 4 Aurors rushed out from the side with their backs to Claremont, guarding the 4 directions, looking serious. But the more this happened, the more Pete felt that the other party could not produce any real evidence, and now it was probably just a bluff. Of course, although Pete had been comforting himself in his heart, his hands still couldn't help but tightly clench the armrests of his seat. After setting up the defense, Andre asked sharply, "Claremont, what is the evidence you are talking about?" "It's memory, Director Andre," Claremont replied, a bit nervous due to the current situation, but knowing there was no turning back. "What memory?" "It's a long-term collection of memories from my more than 10 years working for the Silver Spear. It is full of scenes where I came into contact with the Silver Spear." Claremont couldn't help but glance at Pete as he said this. This made Pete's heart tense suddenly, but he forced himself to remain calm. It was impossible. Their secrecy spells had always been strict. How could Claremont extract the memory? Moreover, he had been loyal for so many years. The evidence was gathered years ago. Now it must be Claremont and Andre trying to put on a show for me. I must not lose my sense of proportion, or I will fall right into their hands. After thinking through all this, Pete suppressed the urge to run away and nailed himself to the seat. Andre also noticed Pete's abnormality and couldn't help but admire his calmness. Then he changed his tone and immediately urged, "Okay, please show the evidence in your hand." "Yes, Director Andre," Claremont sighed softly and then took out a small row of test tubes from his bosom, which contained a magical fluid that shone with a light blue light. Andre nodded upon seeing this, then turned to look at Pete. "Minister Pete, what do you think of the evidence submitted by Claremont?" Andre's sudden question seemed to make Pete more certain that the other party was bluffing. Holding a bunch of bottles filled with someone's memory was like trying to scare him? To this, Pete replied coldly, "It would be best if these memories are really valuable, but the culprit, Michel, has already surrendered himself. In my opinion, the current behavior seems a bit redundant." "Does Minister Pete think so?" Andre sneered teasingly, then turned his head to look at Edmund. "Mr. Schmidt, as the most prestigious wizard in Germany, I wonder if you can operate the memory display for everyone this time?" "You are polite, Director Andre. I am more than willing to help you," Edmund responded with a smile. He then rose from the spectator seats and approached Claremont. Selecting one test tube from the row, he pointed his wand at it and then threw it into the air with a flourish. Under Edmund's control, the thread of memory slowly unraveled, projecting an incredibly realistic 3-dimensional image above everyone's heads. In this image stood 2 people, Claremont, dressed in his usual elaborate attire, exuding confidence, and another figure who made everyone's eyes widen in shock. Pete, dressed in ordinary clothes. In the image, Claremont addressed Pete respectfully. "My lord, the task you entrusted to me has been completed. Director Byers of the Department of Magical Transportation believed my so-called inside information yesterday and bet on Quidditch in the black market. He lost 800 galleons, but he still wants to make money today and has brought another 800 galleons. I think he will lose it all in a few days and won't even be able to afford flu powder." Pete, however, did not show any joy at these words. Instead, he complained, "Why did it take so long? And before things are completely successful, don't be too happy. Although Byers is a waste, he is crucial for our future strategy. The first step in splitting Germany must start with the Department of Magical Transportation." "Sorry, my lord. You are right," Claremont replied, lowering his head in fear. "I will keep an eye on him for the next 2 days and notify you as soon as Byers falls into the trap." "Good," Pete nodded in satisfaction. "Remember, after he loses everything, it's best to lend him some money. I want him to be truly desperate." "My lord, I understand what to do. By the way," Pete suddenly changed the subject. "Besides Byers, we should also pay attention to the Endeavor Society. I've heard that many members are very opposed to conflicts with East Germans. Handle it as soon as possible." End of this chapter. Chapter 589. The fish dies and the net is broken. "Yes, my lord, these wizards are still too weak in their hearts, but it would be a waste to just kick them out of the Endeavor Society." Claremont pondered for a moment. "Do you think it is possible to ask the East German side to cooperate and let the East German associations injure a few of these people when we hold a rally next time? Borrowing conflicts to intensify conflicts?" Pete nodded after thinking for a while. "No problem. Give me the photos of those diehards, and I will arrange it. Someone in East Germany will deal with it. But what if they still cannot change their minds? Then we can only resettle them in another place. Park number 1 has just been built not long ago, but there is a shortage of manpower. If it is not possible, let them come to the park to work for us through internal recruitment. After all, the Endeavor Association is a non-governmental organization. If you take the initiative to fire a large number of people, I'm afraid it will cause dissatisfaction among the members at the bottom," Claremont suggested mockingly. Pete nodded in satisfaction when he heard the words. "Yes, you are very thoughtful, and letting you manage them is indeed the right choice." The video stopped abruptly at this point, and everyone in the venue breathed a sigh of relief. If the content in the picture is true, then Pete is not just related to the Silver Spear. This will prove that Pete may be a Silver Spear himself, and that in addition to his crime of plotting to divide Germany, he actually used tricks to deceive senior officials of the Ministry of Magic. Maybe the other directors and deputy directors who are in the same camp as him were all tricked by him in this way. Thinking of this, everyone in the venue immediately turned their attention to Pete and the directors. The person mentioned in the video, Bayer, the director of the Department of Magical Transportation, had an expression of uncertainty at this moment, as if he himself knew the truth of the matter for the first time. And Pete's face was no longer just ugly. He stood up, full of anger, and shouted at everyone, "This is fake! You must not believe it! It must be that bastard Andre who used the polyjuice potion to pretend to be me, and then played a play with Claremont. This evidence is completely forged." "Really?" Andre smiled coldly after seeing Pete's panicked look, and then turned his head to look at Edmund. "Mr. Schmidt, as a notary, can you find out what's wrong with these memories? Although these memories are well preserved, they can still be felt. It has been taken out for a certain period of time, and it does not seem to have been produced in a short period of time. I am very sure of this." Although Edmund seems to be much weaker than Andre, that is only reflected in his combat effectiveness. His reputation in the local academic circle is still very good. A person with his status as a guarantor has basically already sentenced Pete to death. "No!" Pete yelled furiously. "This is a conspiracy aimed specifically at me. It includes Andre, Claremont, and Edmund. You must have colluded to murder me." "Your rhetoric is totally untenable." Andre shook his head mockingly. We can hand over these memories to other relevant scholars to check and identify the authenticity at any time. It is impossible for me to collude with everyone, right? After hearing Andre's words, Pete was suffocated. He was completely panicked now, and his mind was filled with anger, doubts, and despair. He actually knew very well that these memories were true, but he really couldn't understand how they could exist. Thinking of this, Pete couldn't help but raise his eyes and stare at Claremont fiercely. He really didn't expect that this guy was a traitor from the beginning. Why? How have I treated him badly over the years? And just when Pete lost his composure, the backyard of his camp caught fire. At that moment, Bayer, the director of the Department of Magical Transportation, stood up with a livid face and glared at Pete. Tell me, is everything in the picture true? I didn't expect you to drag me into your camp and use such low-level means. No. Bayer, listen to my explanation. This is all their fabrication, slander. Pete pleaded desperately. He had just lost a director, and if Bayer turned against him now, there would be no room for redemption. But everything said in that video is the truth. Bayer was already furious, and he yelled hysterically, I only believed you because I had a huge gambling debt and was desperate. I joined your so-called club, but I didn't expect you to be so cruel to your own people. You even pulled Michelle out to take the blame. What future do I have with you? Bayer's self-destructive words were like thunder, instantly detonating the scene. Everyone couldn't sit still and stood up in surprise. What? Even Bayer? You are also involved with the Silver Spear? Why, Pete? Aren't you satisfied with being the Minister of Magic? Do you want to tear Germany apart? It's outrageous that a mere Silver Spear dares to get involved in the Ministry of Magic. These people must not be let go. Catch them. These scumbags are the scum of the wizarding world. If we keep them, there will be endless disasters. Everyone at the scene, whether they were Wizengamot counselors, local wizards, reporters, or others who came to watch, were shocked by what Pete and his party had done. Initially, they thought Pete just had some kind of deal with the Silver Spear Club or used its power for his own ends. This was, at most, a scandal in their eyes. However, the revelation that the Minister of Magic himself had joined the Silver Spear, along with other directors, was beyond outrageous. They could all foresee that once this matter spread, the German wizarding world would become a laughingstock. The civilian wizards, unaware of the inside story, would probably collapse on the spot. At this moment, all the wizards wished to tear Pete and the others to pieces. Many even pulled out their wands angrily and pointed them at Pete. Pete, now the target of everyone's ire, suddenly laughed like a madman. I'm so stupid. I didn't expect that so many years of a comfortable life would make me so indecisive. If I had known this, I should have listened to Thunderbird's advice and cleaned up you idiots to avoid future troubles. Seeing that the matter was exposed, Pete no longer bothered to pretend. His words only fueled everyone's resentment. Attention all Aurors, keep Pete and the others under control. Andre, realizing that Pete might still be defiant, immediately shouted to the surroundings. He then jumped to the side, leaped out of the rostrum, drew his wand, and shot a Petrificus Talus at Pete. As soon as Andre finished speaking, several teams of Aurors rushed out from the surrounding side doors and attacked Pete's position. It was clear they had been prepared for a long time. Do you think you can catch me without a fight? Ridiculous. Facing the crowd, Pete was not afraid. He drew out his aspen wand and threw it forward. After angrily shouting, a terrifying wave of magic power erupted from his body. Immediately, the dozens of spells shot at him froze in midair, then flew backward at a faster speed. Several Aurors who hadn't had time to react were instantly knocked away by their own spells. Even apart from the curses, everything within a few meters around Pete was pushed away by this strange magic. Tables and chairs were crushed, and all the nearby wizards were bounced away. In an instant, his surroundings were in chaos. The entire room descended into chaos. Some wizards, realizing their weakness, fled outside, while others, injured by Pete's sudden magical outburst, fell to the ground, colliding with others and exacerbating the disorder. Despite the turmoil, Andre remained calm and took charge of the situation. Non-combatants, leave immediately through the side door. Do not abandon the wounded. The rest of you, surround Pete. We cannot let him escape. Escape? Who said anything about escaping? Pet, his eyes glowed red, giving him a ghostly appearance. Leave it to me, he declared, turning to his fellow wizards. Everyone here must be silenced today. If we leave no survivors, no one will know the truth. I will remain the Minister of Magic, and you will all retain your positions within the ministry. With that, Pete brandished his wand and clenched his left hand tightly. The three exits of the courtroom were suddenly struck by an immense force, causing the boulders above the door beams to crash down and block the portals instantly. Pete's words and actions bewitched the separatist wizards, leaving them in a dilemma. Their identities were now exposed, and fighting seemed to be their only chance for survival. Several wizards loyal to Pete took the lead and attacked everyone in the room. Seeing this, others hesitated but eventually joined the fray, drawing their wands and engaging in battle. The trial hall, spanning over 1,000 square meters, transformed into a fierce battlefield. Several wizards and reporters were hit almost immediately. Fortunately, no one dared to kill directly, so there were no fatalities yet. Seeing that his persuasion had worked, Pete felt confident and turned his attention to Claremont. He blamed his current predicament on the traitor's betrayal and was determined to deal with him first. End of this chapter. Chapter 590, Divine Luo Tianzheng, Request for Recommendations and Monthly Tickets. Heavy Hammer! Pete shouted, waving his wand fiercely at Claremont. A giant battering ram made entirely of magical energy shot out, heading straight for Claremont. The force behind it was so immense that even the aurors nearby would be caught in its destructive path. At that critical moment, a stream of silvery blue light, trailing flames, intercepted the battering ram, halting its advance in mere seconds. The violent collision caused a fierce shockwave, kicking up a cloud of dust and interrupting the surrounding battles, drawing everyone's attention. As the smoke gradually cleared, Claremont stood unscathed. In front of him was a metal longsword, crackling with electric energy. A figure appeared next to the sword, casually picking it up with his right hand and chuckling softly. Minister Pete, I didn't expect to face you again under such circumstances. I'm sorry, but I can't just sit back and let you do as you please, the figure said. Anduin, are you sure you want to oppose me? Pete's eyes were sharp as he glared at the young man standing before him. You can't blame me, Anduin shrugged helplessly. You just said you wanted to silence everyone here. I'm merely protecting myself. Turning to Andre, Anduin continued, Director Andre, I'll hold Pete back. You must organize your people to evacuate the innocent. Understood. Andre, aware of Anduin's strength, didn't hesitate. He signaled to several aurors and Edmund, then retreated. The aurors protecting Claremont reacted quickly. Two of them lifted Claremont and ran towards the side door. Do you think you can stop me? Pete sneered at Anduin's bold words. If Anduin wanted to block his path, he wouldn't show any mercy. Whether it works or not, you have to try to find out. Anduin grinned, whispering softly, Overload. Boom! A wave of magical power, no weaker than Pete's, exploded from Anduin's position. Thick plasma burst from his body, and his eyes shone with a silver light. Anduin knew Pete was a formidable opponent, likely on par with a phoenix or thunderbird, so he unleashed his full power from the start. The sheer intensity of Anduin's transformation was startling, even to Pete. Could this young man, barely 20, possess such power? Was there something wrong with Pete, or had he simply lost touch with the world? Anduin didn't waste time with idle chatter. His overload state couldn't last long. He lifted his sword, Annier, and thrust it into the ground, then charged at Pete with tremendous force. Thunder Sword, Ground Strike. The blade, raised from bottom to top, carried immense power. A half-moon-shaped sword energy raced towards Pete along the ground. Pete quickly perceived the danger. Directly blocking the frontal attack would be a trap. The real threat was the powerful magic surging underground. Anduin had cleverly adapted his attack after observing Pete's previous defense. With a cold smile, Pete lightly kicked off the ground, soaring high as if defying gravity, evading the incoming sword energy. As Anduin's wild thunder sword. As the energy reached the position before Pete, it suddenly exploded, and a lightning bolt as thick as a bucket shot up from the ground, striking the ceiling tens of meters above. The violent roar that followed blew away stones from the roof, causing a rain of debris to fall. Pete, who had leaped into the air to dodge the attack, ignored the chaos behind him. Instead, he flew over Anduin, pointing his wand downward. "Rebuke," he shouted softly. An invisible impact formed instantly, similar to when he had resisted Andre and the others' attacks before. However, this time, the force was concentrated in one direction and was much stronger. Oh, in just a second, the entire ground sank as if trampled by a giant beast. The rock floor was crushed into powder, turning into dust and stone foam, and thick smoke billowed under the violent shock. The onlookers, who had already pressed themselves against the walls, couldn't help but swallow hard. They had stopped fighting long ago, unable to continue amidst the terrifying battle between Pete and Anduin, which seemed capable of destroying the world with every move. Although the wizards of the split faction had been persuaded by Pete to fight, they didn't want to die. If they stayed, they feared they would be caught in the crossfire before the battle was over. Seeing this, Andre, who was organizing people to clear the stone pile at the side gate, shouted at the hesitant wizards, "If you don't want to die, help us clear the way. Do you really think an organization like the Silver Spear cares about you? Remember how Pete treated Michelle and Bayer?" Hearing Andre's words, the wizards hesitated again. They knew he was right. The hundreds of imprisoned wizards were proof that the club didn't care about their lives. Even Claremont, who had worked for Pete for over 10 years, had been forced to betray him. The Silver Spear's reputation was terrible, but if they surrendered without a fight, their fate might be just as grim. Seeing their hesitation, Andre pressed further. "I assure you, on my honor as the director of the Department of Law Enforcement, if you surrender, I can ensure a lighter sentence in the subsequent trial. Most of you were either deceived by Pete or coerced. Those less involved can even make amends by helping us. Your contributions are essential for the Ministry of Magic's continued operation. It's better than dying here." This persuasion lit up their eyes. Andre's reputation was far more reliable than Pete's, especially since many of them had just been following orders and were merely accomplices. "I surrender. I am willing to make amends," a voice rang out from the crowd. It was Matt, who had been opposing Andre during the hearing. Once loyal to Pete, he now led the way in turning against him. Matt rushed out of the crowd and ran towards Andre along the outer wall. "Master Andre, I'm here to help now. Please don't attack me. Just save me a few years in the future." Driven by Matt, the hesitant separatist wizards followed suit. Even the diehards loyal to Pete put down their wands in despair. They knew that the battle was lost. The situation was over, and Pete, who was now the most powerful, was held back by Anduin. Nearly 100 people were involved. Just after Andre finished dealing with the wizards, Pete, who was on the battlefield, also completed his spell. The power of his magic was earth-shattering, and everyone thought he would directly cut through the ground. As the thick dust gradually dissipated, the scene became clear to everyone. At the center of where Anduin had originally stood, a circular pit with a diameter of more than 10 meters and a depth of over 1 meter had been formed. The walls of the pit were smooth, as if they had been specially polished. However, there was no sign of Anduin in the huge pothole. "Sk, did you dodge? I must admit, apart from your sharp attacks, you also have top-notch escape skills," Pete remarked, not too surprised that he had missed Anduin. Given the strength Anduin had shown, it would have been naive to think he could be defeated so easily. "Although that's what you said, that spell you just cast was really scary. I almost didn't realize it." Anduin's voice came from beside Pete, who was still in the sky. When everyone looked towards the sound, they saw Anduin floating in the air at an altitude of 20 meters, just like Pete. Anduin now wore an ink-black high-necked cloak that floated behind him like wings, despite the lack of wind. He looked at Pete with a chuckle. "The spell you just used, although it looks like high-strength control magic, if I'm not mistaken, what you're manipulating is pure gravity, right?" Anduin had his suspicions about Pete's magic ever since he saw Pete rebound everyone's spells. It reminded him of the Shen Luo Tianzheng technique with its domineering effect. After experiencing Pete's attack up close, Anduin was almost certain. Pete, or rather the magic that Golden Snidget excelled at, was manipulating gravity. To be honest, This revelation was beyond Anduin's expectations. He hadn't anticipated that there could be magic capable of controlling gravity. It was a testament to Pete's prowess, marking him as one of the 4 veterans of the club, with skills not weaker than the other 3. End of this chapter. Chapter 591, Fighting with Immortals. I didn't expect that apart from your strength, even your vision is so exceptional. Anduin, among the new generation of wizards, I am afraid that no one can surpass you, Pete said, restraining himself to express his appreciation. But soon he changed the subject again. It would be a pity for a young man with such a bright future like you to die here. Do you want to consider switching to my sect? I guarantee that you will be able to make further progress with the Silver Spear. You can't protect yourself now, so don't say such big words, Anduin replied mockingly. Besides, it seems to be in my best interest to help the German Ministry of Magic at a critical moment, right? Then there's nothing to talk about. Pete knew that for a businessman like Anduin, who is blinded by profit, immediate benefits are the most attractive. But whether he could get them or not was up to his own hands. Suck! Pete pointed his wand at Anduin, and soon a strong suction force formed in a cone-shaped area in front of his wand. Even Anduin, who had a deep knowledge of control magic, couldn't help being held back, and it was very difficult for him to resist. Faced with this situation, Anduin did not panic. After wrestling with no results, he simply gave up resisting and even rushed towards Pete without retreating. In the process of rushing forward, Anduin adjusted his posture and then swung forward with the momentum. Thunder Sword, Stormblade. After being blessed by the wild thunder, the extinction flashed with breathtaking thunderlight. Each swing of Anduin cut out a silver sword with a faint blue light, forming a whirlwind completely controlled by thunder and lightning. Edmund, who was watching from below, could even see the shadow of Andre's blade storm from this storm. Obviously, Anduin had learned from Andre's experience and used this trick by analogy. Facing the galloping thunderstorm and Anduin, Pete pointed his wand upwards without any hesitation. Lift! Under Pete's control, the direction of the gravitational force guiding Anduin changed again, suddenly shifting from suction to upward force. This caused Anduin, who was charging forward with all his strength, to lose his balance in the air and be pushed upwards obliquely. However, Anduin remained calm. He quickly increased the magic power output of the flying cloak and exerted force downwards, using the floating spell to stabilize himself and avoid hitting the ceiling above. When he looked at Pete again, he suddenly found a piece of good news that surprised him. Although his Stormblade sword move was also affected by gravity, the deviation was almost negligible, and it was still moving towards Pete's location. Although Pete avoided the Stormblade's attack with just a short step down, it allowed Anduin to discover the opponent's weakness. It seems that Pete's gravitational control has little effect on the barren mines. That's right, the effect of gravity on the electric potential is really insignificant. The most troublesome thing now is the interference of gravity on my body, Anduin thought silently. Pete on the opposite side was also taken aback. Could the sword energy made of lightning ignore his gravity? Then directly target Anduin. The two of them formulated their own tactics at the moment of confrontation. Fall. Pete, who had made up his mind, took the lead and swung his wand from top to bottom. Anduin suddenly fell at an extremely fast speed. In fact, there was no way to avoid this. Because of resisting the rising force just now, Anduin had been flying downwards to stabilize his balance, which meant that he had been exerting downward force all the time. As a result, Pete suddenly changed the direction of gravity, and his balance was disrupted. Anduin's ascent turned into a fall in an instant. Coupled with the original gravity, he plummeted at a speed several times faster than free fall. To the onlookers, it seemed as if Anduin was actively diving downwards. The sudden change caught Anduin by surprise, but his overload state heightened his sensitivity to both perception and magic control. It took him less than a second to react, using a floating spell to stabilize himself. Even so, he was only 1 or 2 meters from the ground, nearly crashing face first. So troublesome, Anduin muttered, clearly annoyed. The way his opponent manipulated gravity was entirely different from his method of controlling others with magic. When controlled by spells like Mage Hand, one could use their own magic to break free, and the power of long-distance control would naturally attenuate. However, directly controlling gravitational force left Anduin with no choice but to counteract the influence by constantly moving in the opposite direction. Pete only needed to frequently change the direction of gravity to upset Anduin's balance. No matter how fast Anduin's reactions were, it took time to adapt. It was like a desperate tug of war where one person suddenly let go and then kicked you. If this continued, Pete could keep changing the gravitational direction, and Anduin would be completely disoriented in no time. Realizing this, Anduin knew he couldn't continue the stalemate. He gritted his teeth, and the continuously steaming plasma quickly shrank toward his body until the blue-silver plasma adhered to him like a tight armor. "Overload. Phantom is invisible," he declared. On the other side, Pete, realizing he hadn't killed his opponent, prepared to try again. But he immediately noticed Anduin's speed had increased several times. Anduin rushed to the side with a whoosh, transforming into a bolt of lightning. In Pete's field of vision, Anduin seemed to become a meteor, circling around him and leaving afterimages. It was difficult to keep up with Anduin's trajectory. "Reject!" Pete shouted, using a repulsive force to try and destroy Anduin's balance. Despite preparing in advance, the attack failed. Anduin's figure disappeared from Pete's field of vision, leaving only afterimages formed by electric light. Thundersword, Knife Whirlwind. Anduin took the opportunity to launch an attack. Dozens of meteor daggers made of lightning struck Pete from all directions, surrounding him. These meteor-like stabs were quick and ruthless, with Anduin frequently changing direction. The attack angles varied, some coming from above, others from below. For a moment, Pete seemed like a target standing in the middle of a field. The sudden attack flustered Pete. Since the wild thunders were not affected by gravity, he couldn't block them all simultaneously. Pete dodged in the air, casting the iron armor curse to parry. When several desolate thunder meteors approached him at once, and he couldn't escape, he had to rely on the full-body iron armor curse to resist, making him look quite embarrassed. "Using ultra-high-speed movement so that I can't lock on," Pete thought, struggling to keep up with Anduin's relentless assault. Pete was struggling, contemplating how to break the stalemate. Should I use a super wide range of repulsion or gravity to disrupt his balance? No, if the range is too wide, the force will attenuate. Anduin has probably noticed this since he has kept his distance from me. If that's the case, then I'll wait it out and see how long you can maintain this high-intensity movement. Having made up his mind, Pete's eyes suddenly became fierce. He shouted, "Get up!" At his command, the entire courtroom shook. Tables, chairs, benches, and the rubble from the battle aftermath began to rise as if entering a weightless space. These objects swirled around Pete, forming a nebula-like barrier with him at the core. The floating debris served as his shield, blocking Anduin's sword array attacks as much as possible. The wizards hiding below watched this celestial battle in terror, crouching on the ground. "This is too scary. Is this really a battle between wizards? Why does it feel like the end of the world?" "Mom, I want to go home," some muttered. A few bold reporters even risked raising their cameras to capture the scene. To them, this was the epitome of big news, far more sensational than any political turmoil. Regardless of what these onlookers were thinking, they now had a clear understanding that Pete and Anduin's fighting power was on a completely different level. Especially Anduin, this master alchemist was young, wealthy, successful in his career, and could fight so fiercely. Was this really something a normal person could do? The door is open. The passage is clear. Cheers erupted from the side. Under Andre's command, the boulder blocking the side door was finally removed, and Andre had even widened the door to ensure a smooth escape. The efficiency of the aurors was impressive. It had taken only a few minutes to open the passage. However, the explosive battle between Anduin and Pete made those few minutes feel like an eternity to everyone present. End of this chapter. Chapter 592, Aftermath, Seeking Recommendations and Monthly Tickets. As soon as the escape route was opened, the wizards didn't dare to linger. They bolted for the gate, rushing out in a frantic attempt to flee. However, Andre, experienced and level-headed, knew that stampedes were likely in such chaotic situations. He immediately called the aurors to maintain order, prioritize the care of the wounded, and guide everyone to escape in an orderly manner. Of course, Andre did not forget to keep an eye on the separatist wizards. At this time, they all wore forbidden handcuffs on their hands, looking extremely dejected, but at least they had survived, which was a small mercy for them. After escaping from the courtroom, Andre continued to make arrangements for the Aurors in an orderly manner. Teams 3 and 4, you're responsible for escorting everyone out of the courtroom. Team 5, take care of the wounded. Team 6, handle the suspects, but remember, don't let them leave the Ministry of Magic. You can take them to the Law Enforcement Division first. He then turned to Edmund, who was standing next to him. Mr. Schmidt, please help communicate with everyone to calm their emotions. Also, the scandal about the Minister of Magic being a member of the Silver Lance must not spread. I understand what you mean, Edmund nodded solemnly. I will warn those wizard families to keep quiet, but what about the rest? The members of the Wizengamot know how to handle this. They don't want the world to descend into chaos. The most important thing is the reporters. You should ask them to sign a confidentiality contract, depending on the situation. For the sake of the Ministry of Magic's reputation, Andre had to take some coercive measures. Although Pete's identity had to be revealed to bring him down, Andre didn't want it to become public knowledge. Okay, leave it to me, Edmund responded immediately. What about you? Are you going to support Anduin? That's right. I can't let Anduin face Pete alone, especially since he's in a tough fight right now. After saying that, Andre turned to the Aurors. Teams 1 and 2, return to Jury Room 1 with me. We can't let this bastard Pete get away. As a group of wizards escaped from the courtroom, Pete on the other side noticed the commotion. Although he was very anxious, he was completely held back by Anduin. Parrying Anduin's relentless attacks took most of his energy, leaving him no room to maneuver. Seeing that there was no way to keep those insiders, Pete realized that his plan within the Ministry of Magic was completely shattered. Although he was very unwilling, the biggest problem now was to escape immediately. If he didn't, the Auror reinforcements would soon arrive. And even if he wasn't afraid of group attacks, he would still be overwhelmed by their numbers. Thinking of this, Pete turned his attention to another side door. Apparition and portkeys couldn't be used within the Ministry of Magic, so he had to find another way out. The side door opened by Andre was crowded with people, making it an impractical escape route. After a quick calculation, Pete controlled the ruins that were circling around him and slowly leaned down. But Anduin, who was launching a siege, noticed Pete's intentions. Seeing that Pete wanted to escape, he immediately intensified his offensive. Thunder Sword, destroy meteor. Pete, who was shifting while parrying, noticed that Anduin's attack had changed. Instead of shooting out several dagger-like meteors simultaneously, it now turned into dozens of finger-sized lightning meteors, scattering like a shower of sparks. These fine magical meteors, like elementary school students who had just learned they were on vacation, rushed around chaotically, converging on Pete from all directions. Even if Pete accelerated the speed of the surrounding nebula, he still couldn't block all the electric light. Some magical sword energy always managed to slip through the gaps and stab at him. This forced Pete to concentrate on parrying the attacks. Although these lightning and stars seemed inconspicuous, he knew very well that the destructive power they contained was terrifying. The constant strikes around him, melting away his defenses, were a stark reminder of this. At this moment, Andre and the others, who had returned to the courtroom for reinforcements, arrived. When they saw Pete being unilaterally suppressed and beaten by Anduin, they were secretly startled. How had the situation changed so drastically in such a short time? Don't just stand there, help him, Andre shouted, taking the lead and rushing forward. The storm is surging, he yelled, casting a spell. A violent whirlwind appeared out of thin air like a hurricane-formed locomotive, hitting Pete from below with immense force. Pete, already busy parrying the lightning meteors, was caught off guard by Andre's sudden attack. He was drenched in sweat, realizing he had to make a quick decision. Should he block Andre's attack with repulsion? But doing so would leave him vulnerable to the lightning bolts, and he would likely be hit regardless. It was too late to think. Rebuke! Pete yelled in desperation. A massive repulsive force surged out from him, pushing the nebula and everything around him away, like a shotgun blast firing in all directions. The sudden burst of repulsion deflected Andre's storm hammer and caused debris to fly everywhere. Fortunately, the debris had been shattered by Anduin's lightning, so to the Aurors, it felt more like a slow hailstorm, which their iron armor curse could barely resist. However, the powerful repulsive force was a different matter. Although Pete was far from them, the curse had been strengthened by charging, making it a fatal blow. Many Aurors were stiffened by the sudden gravity, and some even fell to the ground. Even Anduin, who had been circling, was affected and flew a certain distance. Luckily, his high-speed movement offset much of the force, allowing him to maintain his balance. Despite using the large-scale repulsive force to fend off most attacks and the enemy's offensive, Pete's situation was dire. The impact of Anduin's Surge of the Storm was stronger than he had imagined. The coercion from the stirring airflow alone was suffocating. Anduin's destroying meteor had hit Pete several times. Although most were blocked by his instant body armor curse, one shot managed to hit him directly, breaking through the iron armor curse and striking his body. The moment Pete was hit by Anduin's wild thunder, he realized how formidable his opponent's magic was. The piercing electric current spread from his skin to his entire body, freezing him on the spot and causing him to fall from a high altitude. The current was accompanied by severe pain, almost piercing his soul, drenching him in sweat instantly. The direct lethality of wild thunder was even more terrifying. A fist-sized hole was visible on Pete's back waist, the flesh and blood inside scorched black by electricity. If Anduin's destroying meteor hadn't been a scatter attack, and if Pete's physique wasn't so robust, he might have been pierced through or even cut in half. Why? I just want to live, Pete thought, his mind racing as he struggled to stay conscious. At this moment, Pete struggled to get up. He knew that escape was unlikely, and his face showed a mix of resentment and grief. He looked at everyone with a puzzled expression. The German magical world just wants a stable and peaceful life. Why do you Silver Spears work so hard to stir up trouble? Andre walked towards Pete, stepping carefully among the ruins. His face was also filled with anger. Stirring up trouble? Andre echoed, his voice dripping with disdain. You call defending ourselves stirring up trouble? Pete sighed self-deprecatingly, and then glanced at Anduin, who had landed like a meteor, his figure emerging from the electric light. And you, Pete said, his voice tinged with bitterness, why did you get involved? With your strength, you clearly don't need to fight me. Are you out of your mind? Anduin retorted coldly. You tried to kill me before. What, you think I shouldn't retaliate? The world doesn't revolve around you, Pete. Things don't always go your way. I see. The world really doesn't revolve around me, Pete murmured, as if he were speaking more to himself than to anyone else. How did I become so arrogant? Well, I won't make these mistakes again in the future. Pete, now desperate, suddenly mobilized all the magic power in his body, as if preparing some powerful spell. Andre and Anduin didn't hesitate. They raised their hands and cast 2 curses. But to their surprise, Pete didn't unleash any strange magic. It was as if he was just pretending. The spells hit him smoothly, one after the other, and the force was so great that Pete's body deformed upon impact. Pete's body fell to the ground like a deflated balloon. Nothing happened. Or was there something they didn't know about? The ease with which they had killed Pete made Anduin doubt himself for a moment. But Andre didn't overthink it. He walked straight to Pete's body, squatted down, and checked it. Then he raised his head and said, "He's dead. Absolutely dead." End of this chapter. Chapter 593, Sense of Violation. But what did he mean by that last sentence? I won't do it again? What's his future now? Anduin muttered to himself, puzzled. He then recalled the strange occurrences he had witnessed. Did the golden snidget appearing in 2 places at once mean the other party had some hidden cards? Was the other party still alive? Moreover, Anduin could clearly sense that Pete, who had just fought him, was not as strong as he had imagined. Compared to Phoenix and Thunderbird, Pete's spellcasting strength and mana reserves were inferior. It was just that his gravitational magic was overwhelmingly dominant, restraining all wizards within a certain distance and making it very difficult for Anduin to deal with. Otherwise, he believed he wouldn't have struggled so much. Unfortunately, the information he had gathered was still too little for him to draw a conclusion. Shaking his head helplessly, Anduin took out a bottle of nourishing potion and drank it vigorously. The battle had drained him significantly, almost depleting all his magic power. His expression was still as pale as paper. After adjusting his state a bit, Anduin approached Andre. "How is it? Are the others seriously injured?" "Thanks to your timely action, no one died," Andre sighed softly. "However, a few people were seriously injured, and more than a dozen were slightly injured. Fortunately, the crisis has been resolved, and the culprit, Pete, has finally been brought to justice." Andre looked down at Pete. This former colleague from the Ministry of Magic now lay covered in dirt, his chest and shoulders dented by the last two spells. Despite their political differences, Andre had once respected Pete's character. It was hard to believe that in just over a month they had become mortal enemies. Andre then glanced around. The other Aurors, having recovered somewhat, were approaching, but the lingering fear in their eyes was unmistakable. They were in awe of Pete's strength and also disturbed by his identity. Anduin, who had killed Pete, felt little about it. The Aurors' disturbed attitudes stemmed from their lack of knowledge. If they knew Pete's full story as Anduin did, they would feel no psychological burden. However, this battle had been truly suspenseful. It was the first time Anduin had faced the outrageous ability of gravity control, which rendered all his throwing props useless, forcing him to adopt a different strategy. Pete's destructive power was astonishing. The first courtroom, the largest in the Ministry of Magic, was now in ruins. The floor, walls, and even the ceiling were pitted from the battle's aftermath. Anduin approached Pete's corpse and inspected it. It appeared to be a normal human body, but something felt off. After a careful investigation, Anduin found the problem. Pete's body had no detectable magic power. Even with a magic power detector, the results confirmed his suspicion. There was no magic power left in Pete's body, making it like the corpse of an ordinary muggle. This was extremely unusual, because a wizard's magic power is typically bound to their body. Even after death, remnants should remain in their blood, muscle tissue, and bones, slowly dissipating over time. Anduin had conducted many experiments on this, so he could detect the difference. In Pete. Why did this happen? Does it have something to do with the last time he accumulated magic power? A lot of questions kept circling in Anduin's mind. Multiple pieces of evidence suggested that Pete's death was not normal, and he had to start tracking another golden snidget immediately after returning. As Anduin examined Pete's body and drew blood, Andre felt a little strange. "What's wrong, Anduin? Is there a problem?" "It's nothing, just a routine inspection. Even if many wizards lose their vitality, there may be hidden dangers on their bodies, such as viruses and curses. They must be completely eliminated, just like the Phoenix before," Anduin replied, not sharing his doubts with Andre. He didn't plan to involve the Ministry of Magic in his follow-up actions against the club, so he found a reason to deflect. "You're still cautious enough. Whether it's the battle or the preparation before and after the event, I feel that you are more like an Auror than us," Andre said, recalling how careful Anduin had been during the Phoenix War. He couldn't help but sigh with admiration. Then he asked jokingly, "By the way, will you include these details in your tactical training textbook? I can't wait to read your book." Andre was well aware of the book Anduin was writing. He had even made reservations with Anduin early on, preparing for the teaching plan of the law enforcement department. "There will be everything that should be there, but I'm still sorting it out. Maybe you can watch it if you don't." Anduin chuckled at Andre's compliments. Anduin then took out the space bag from Pete's body and checked its contents in front of Andre. Andre had no objections, as Anduin had been the main combat force against Pete and would share any important information with him after organizing it. However, after careful inspection, Anduin found that the contents of Pete's space bag were pitifully small, only a few galleons, some Ministry of Magic documents, and some common magic potions. There were no items related to the club, such as the elixir. The only valuable item was a portkey, but its destination needed to be tested to determine. Except for some internal documents of the Ministry of Magic, there are no high-value items. These documents are basically regular files, and there is no illegal content in them. It seems that Pete was usually very careful and didn't carry anything incriminating, Anduin said, shaking his head regretfully. He returned the entire space bag to Andre, except for the port key. With Pete's cautious personality, it's normal for such a situation to happen, Andre said, not too surprised. By the way, is the next step still going according to plan? I didn't expect Pete to be so decisive at a critical moment, trying to kill us. Isn't this a possibility we calculated early on? We just didn't expect him to be so powerful, and the magic he used was so strange, Anduin replied, standing up and stretching his body. After this battle, he was very tired. Andre also stood up and turned to the Auror next to him. Pack up Pete's body. Let's go meet the others now. The second team will go to each division immediately and secure the director's office and the minister's office. The first team will go to Pete's residence outside the Ministry of Magic after disposing of his body, seal off the residence, and conduct a thorough search later. Yes. A group of Aurors acted immediately after receiving the order. They had been following Andre and Anduin for a long time and knew the situation very clearly, so they didn't hesitate. Anduin returned to the law enforcement department with Andre. There were still many things waiting for them. First of all, the wizards who witnessed the entire courtroom proceedings need to be dealt with. These individuals are not members of the Wizengamot in the Ministry of Magic, but representatives from various walks of life, including wizarding families and reporters from major wizarding newspapers. To keep the secret of Pete being a silver spear, they must all be silenced to prevent any panic from spreading. This is the strategy that Andre and Anduin have set. Although Edmund has been instructed to handle it, Andre must still agree with their approach. Even those separatist wizards must be dealt with, though there is no need to be overly polite with these suspects. Coercive means can be used directly. The official narrative will be that Pete conspired to manipulate civil society groups and maliciously influence public opinion. His relationship with the Silver Spear will be portrayed as merely a cooperative one. Today's conflict cannot be concealed, so it will be presented as Pete violently resisting the law with solid evidence until he was ultimately killed on the spot by Anduin and a group of Aurors after a fierce battle. Additionally, there is much work to be done within the Ministry of Magic. This includes filling the vacancies left by dismissed personnel, appeasing the emotions of employees, and maintaining the ministry's operations. Besides unifying the public opinion domestically and internationally, another task is to increase Andre's propaganda to stabilize the situation in the German wizarding world. After this upheaval, Andre's reputation will undoubtedly soar, which will help dilute the negative impact of Pete's actions. Regarding the Split Act, Anduin suggests not abolishing it too quickly, but rather restoring it to its previous unified state, step by step. Most wizards in Germany have been brainwashed by Pete for a long time and are accustomed to the split state. Sudden changes might have counterproductive effects. The next step is to increase publicity, blaming the leaders of civil society and Pete for the reasons behind the split. Through a period of targeted propaganda and measures such as gradually reconnecting the domestic flu network and lifting the soft isolation of Dudenglo, the German wizarding world should regain its vitality within a year or two. End of this chapter. Chapter 594, The Aftermath. When they arrived at the Department of Legal Enforcement, Anduin first went to the area where the split faction wizards were detained. He brought out Maite, who had been combative during the hearing and later led the defection. Andre was a bit surprised. After regaining his freedom, Maite immediately approached Anduin with a sly smile. "How about it, my lord? Were my acting skills satisfactory?" Maite asked. "You did an excellent job. Your skill level is truly impressive," Anduin replied with a smile, then handed him a bottle of potion. "Anduin, who is this?" Andre asked, puzzled by the interaction. Moments later, Maite drank the potion and transformed, revealing himself to be Shaltair. "So that's it. You had Shaltair take the polyjuice potion early in the morning to impersonate Maite and infiltrate the wizards," Andre realized. "I was wondering why Maite suddenly acted so impulsively and then defected so quickly during the battle." "Hey, It's all thanks to my superb acting skills. Without my efforts in their camp, things wouldn't have gone so smoothly, Shaltir said proudly, her sly expression returning. Andre shook his head in disbelief. Despite their clear advantage, Anduin had planted a hidden agent. Shaltir's presence had disrupted the hearing and made it easier for Andre to persuade the wizards. But what about the real Maite? Andre asked, still confused. I've hidden him in a safe place. I'll hand him over to you shortly, Anduin replied briefly. He then whispered in Shaltir's ear, Go back immediately and find Huoge. Have him monitor Jin Snidget's movements and the situation at the Silver Spear headquarters. Notify me as soon as he finds anything. Jin Snidget still alive? Isn't he Pete? Shaltir raised her eyebrows in surprise, but trusted Anduin's judgment. She nodded and left immediately. For the rest of the day, Anduin stayed at the Ministry of Magic, assisting Andre with various tasks. With the cooperation of Andre and Edmund, all parties involved in the incident accepted the confidentiality arrangement. They understood the gravity of the situation and did not want to cause chaos. During the negotiations, many Wizengamot members appreciated Andre's sense of responsibility. Under Edmund's leadership, several reviewers proposed that Andre should be the first to assume the position of Minister of Magic. Given the extraordinary circumstances, with the former minister Pete rebelling publicly, someone needed to lead the Ministry of Magic and maintain order. Without clear leadership, the ministry's employees might panic, potentially paralyzing the entire department. Andre accepted the responsibility and immediately directed several familiar Wizengamot reviewers to meet with middle-level management in various divisions. This major event needed to be communicated gradually from top to bottom. Among the Ministry of Magic's departments, the Law Enforcement Department could guarantee absolute stability, and the director of the Magic Sports Department could also ensure that there was no disruption. There will be no chaos in the department because he has always stood by Andre's side. Additionally, Keller, who is in charge of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, is exactly as Anduin guessed, an old fox with an extremely sensitive political sense. There will be no trouble from him. The real trouble lies with the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters, the Department of Regulation and Control of Magical Beasts, and the Department of Magical Transportation. These departments have long operated under the banner of the Split faction, and many of their employees are die-hard supporters of Peter's faction or have been associated with them to some extent. For example, in the files Anduin obtained from Phoenix, there are many such individuals. Therefore, we must be cautious when dealing with them. Andre first followed Anduin's suggestion and met with Bayer, the former director of the Department of Magical Transportation. Bayer had been a close follower of Pete, but it was impossible to overlook his past entirely. However, considering Bayer's significant contributions in exposing Pete's identity and his subsequent cooperative behavior, Andre asked him to temporarily assist in appeasing the staff of the Department of Magical Transportation in exchange for a commutation of his sentence. In the future, Bayer could also serve as a model, speaking out in various departments about Pete and his gang's actions, albeit in a packaged manner. If Bayer performs well, Andre doesn't mind giving him a chance to retire peacefully, similar to what he did for Claremont. The remaining departments are the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters and the Department of Regulation and Control of Magical Beasts. To handle these two departments, Andre plans to personally appoint new directors. The Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters is Peter's earliest stronghold and is considered the second largest law enforcement department in the Ministry of Magic, so it must be treated with caution. Andre plans to promote a high-ranking member of the Schmidt family as the new director. Since Edmund, the family patriarch and a member of the Wizengamot, is not allowed to hold important positions in the Ministry of Magic according to usual practice, Andre chose Edmund's younger brother, Alan, to take up the post of director. This move also serves as a way to repay the Schmidt family. As for the Department of Regulation and Control of Magical Beasts, Anduin originally wanted to manage it temporarily, but he was preoccupied with the headquarters of the Silver Spear and had no time for these matters. Therefore, he had to decline. Consequently, Andre had to ask another prestigious wizard in the German magical world to help out temporarily. After determining the candidates for the directors, the next step was to address the middle-level management cadres. In these three major divisions, almost all supervisory-level individuals were Pete's minions. With their removal, these divisions would likely experience a short period of paralysis. To mitigate this, Andre proposed interviewing individuals who were not deeply involved in the case. Based on the files obtained from Phoenix, he gave them a chance to atone for their crimes by temporarily returning to their posts to maintain the normal operation of various departments. Naturally, these individuals were eager to comply. They had expected prison life, but now they had the chance to be reinstated, so they had no objections. For the remaining positions, Andre could only select trusted cadres from the legal enforcement department. Only now did Anduin realize how correct his original suggestion was. If all those involved in the case had been completely removed, the Ministry of Magic would have been left in a state of disarray. Magic might indeed face a predicament where it becomes non-functional. However, in addition to these arrangements, Andre extended an olive branch to Nathan and Bob, inviting them to join the Ministry of Magic. On one hand, this is because these two individuals are seen as heroes who indirectly rescued hundreds of people, though, unbeknownst to the public, this was all part of a plot secretly orchestrated by Anduin and others. Their inclusion would enhance the reputation of the Ministry of Magic. On the other hand, Nathan and Bob have proven their reliability and potential, especially given their ability to master spellcasting without a staff in critical moments. Nathan and Bob were naturally very grateful for this opportunity. With their recommendation, Andre was able to identify and recruit some reliable wizards from the park, integrating them into the three divisions. This move not only diluted the proportion of personnel in these divisions, but also brought in individuals who harbored a deep-seated hatred for the Silver Spear and viewed Andre as a savior. Their presence could indirectly influence public opinion within the divisions. This strategy also served as a preparation for the future. Although these new recruits were relatively inexperienced in the affairs of the Ministry of Magic and not yet ready to take on significant responsibilities, Andre planned to give them a year or two to familiarize themselves with the operations of various departments. This would eventually allow him to clean out the corrupt elements in the three major divisions without disrupting departmental operations. These were all suggestions from Anduin, who was straightforward and candid with those he trusted. Andre followed Anduin's advice to the letter. As a result, the internal operations of the Ministry of Magic gradually returned to normal, though Andre and Anduin were exhausted by the end of the day. For many Ministry employees, the day's events were akin to a sudden change in weather. Minister Pete had been in charge in the morning, but by noon, not only had the original minister died, but their immediate boss had also become a prisoner. This sudden shift left everyone suspicious and uncertain. Fortunately, members of the Wizengamot and reporters stood firm, providing witness testimonies to explain the situation. Former employees who had committed crimes but now sought redemption also offered their testimonies, helping to stabilize the ministry. As Anduin finished his work and prepared to leave, he was intercepted by a group of reporters. Despite signing non-disclosure contracts, these reporters had stayed behind, partly to help and partly to interview Anduin. The strength and financial resources he displayed in the courtroom had caught their attention, and they knew they couldn't miss the chance to interview the protagonist of such a significant event. While local wizards like Andre had plenty of interview opportunities, Anduin was different. He wasn't German, and if he left today, they might not get another chance to meet him. Although Anduin wasn't one to seek the limelight, he recognized the value of this free publicity for his business. So, despite his exhaustion, he spent over an hour dealing with the reporters. End of this chapter. Chapter 595, I Must Meet Him. The next day, when the daily newspaper was published, the entire German magical world was in an uproar. What? The division bill of the German Ministry of Magic was actually a conspiracy by Minister Pete? And most of those civil society organizations are groups colluding with the Silver Spear? The newspapers not only dedicated extensive pages to expose Pete's cooperation with the Silver Spear, to control non-governmental organizations and maliciously intensify the conflict between East and West Germany, but they also published the names of numerous groups involved in the case. Many German wizards were shocked to discover the dark secrets behind the associations they had previously trusted. In addition to spreading the news, a large number of aurors began visiting the residences of these civil society organizations, arresting their leaders one by one. This further proved that the incident was not a fabrication. However, due to the long-term operation of these organizations within major wizarding communities, many civilian wizards found it hard to accept the truth, even with testimonies from Wizengamot reviewers and previously rescued wizards published in the newspapers. Early in the morning, a large number of skeptical wizards crowded the hall of the Ministry of Magic, eager to uncover the truth. Andre and his team, forewarned by Anduin, had prepared for this and set up a public trial platform in the center of the hall. When prominent figures, including directors of various magical departments and heads of civil organizations, confessed their crimes on the public trial stand, the bewildered wizards finally woke up to the reality. They immediately changed their attitudes, denouncing these scoundrels for using conspiracies to deceive the public. Indirectly, Andre's reputation in the entire German magical world soared to new heights. After all, if it weren't for him, everyone might still be immersed in deception. In addition to Andre, Anduin also gained significant recognition, especially when everyone read about Anduin's battle against Pete's magical forces in the report. They realized that this young alchemist master and the boss of Silver Flash Trading Company was a wizard with extraordinary combat power. In a short period, Anduin amassed a large number of fans in the German wizarding world. His outstanding appearance, successful career, and strength made him very attractive. This indirectly led to a sudden surge in the popularity of Silver Flash products in Germany, with everyone proud to own something from the Silver Flash firm. Seeing this, Andre followed suit and officially handed over Claremont's magic supply shop to Anduin in the name of the Ministry of Magic, granting him an official branch in Germany with permanent property rights. Anduin naturally accepted the offer. Claremont's firm was also an alchemy shop, so it only needed a change in decoration style to start business immediately. Anduin entrusted Shaltir with the management of the shop. Various related honors were also awarded. Nathan, Bob, and Anduin, among others, received the Gold Medal of Bravery. However, this made Moody very upset. He had also come to help, so why wasn't he included? Unfortunately, Moody's work often required him to stay out of the public eye. To appease him, Andre secretly gifted him a winery that had also been seized, which finally stopped his grumbling. Interestingly, this seized winery was the Dino Magic Winery, where Anduin had first arrived in Germany, and where he had a sudden conflict with the drunken Wayham. Unexpectedly, the owner of this winery is also the leader of a non-governmental organization in East Germany. No wonder Claremont generously gave wine to his subordinates when he was in the park. However, although the affairs of the German Ministry of Magic had come to an end, Anduin did not dare to relax. After he returned, Hogg told him something both unreasonable and expected. The Golden Snidget was indeed still alive. Anduin had once taken the opportunity to put a track on the Golden Snidget. As long as it moved, Hogg could track it. At this time, the tracking and positioning device showed that the Golden Snidget still moved occasionally. It seems that now we can be sure that the secret of the Golden Snidget is not the time turner, Anduin mused, staring at the magic map in front of him. The red dot representing the Golden Snidget moved sporadically. But Pete obviously died in front of me on the spot, so what is going on with the Golden Snidget now? Could it be that the Golden Snidget was two people from the beginning, or is it some kind of soul transfer? No. My lord, the other party has basically been nesting in the same place for the past 2 days. It's not far from Pete's original address. Shall we go directly and catch him? Hogg suggested, not overthinking the situation as Anduin did. For the time being, it's better not to act rashly, Anduin replied, shaking his head. After all, it's an urban area, and it's easy to hurt innocent people in a fight. In addition, We don't know if the other party only has these two bodies. What if another golden snidget appears after we kill him? Then what should we do now? Just keep monitoring him like this, Hog asked, scratching his head in boredom. Surveillance was not his favorite task, especially when it dragged on. There is still too little information right now. We have to find a way to take the initiative. I have to go to the headquarters of the Silver Spear. It's also time for the Thunderbirds to learn about the failure of the club's German strategy. I just took this opportunity to go crazy. By the way, let's see if we can force the Golden Snidget out, Anduin decided. He got up, changed into his Silver Spear clothes, and grabbed a few newspapers from the past 2 days. He then adopted an angry posture, which made Hog sigh. The boss's acting skills were becoming more and more natural. After entering the headquarters of the Silver Spear, Thunderbird immediately slapped the newspapers on the long table in the reception room and scolded the Ash Snake. What the hell is going on? How could you let them catch everyone at once? There is such a big problem with the club's strategy, and I had to find out about it from the newspaper. Ash Snake shook his head in embarrassment, facing the furious Thunderbird. I don't know the details. I also learned about this situation from Golden Snidget's message, and I still haven't figured out what happened. What about the Golden Snidget? He won't run away, right? Thunderbird glared fiercely at the Ash Snake, approaching him step by step. Didn't you ask him the ins and outs? You Silver Spears don't want to piss me off, do you? Seeing the threatening Thunderbird, the Ash Snake became anxious and hurriedly shouted, "How could that be? Since this incident happened, Golden Snidget hasn't returned to the headquarters, and I'm also in the dark. If we really conspired to leave you behind, why would I bring you into the headquarters? So, you haven't seen him again except for being summoned by Golden Snidget?" Thunderbird stopped and muttered irritably, "Is it possible that he is going to dump us all? Even you?" "Impossible." Ash Snake shook his head resolutely. Almost all the club's inventory is stored in the headquarters. He wouldn't abandon that. At this moment, the Fire Ash Snake realized he had said something he shouldn't have, so he immediately closed his mouth and looked down at the floor in embarrassment. "Huh?" Thunderbird turned his head and fixed his gaze on him. "What did you say? Is there a direct passage in the headquarters to the residence of the Rune Snake?" The Fire Ash Snake knew he had slipped up, and it was too late to deny it. Yes, there is indeed a portal in the headquarters that leads directly to the residence of the Rune Snake, but it is one way. It can only be used with the consent of the Rune Snake. So not only have you been guarding the headquarters, but you've also been guarding the door to the Rune Snake? And during your molting period, Thunderbird looked at the Fire Ash Snake in surprise. That's right. I am allowed to go over there once a month. Besides delivering some basic supplies for the Rune Snake, there is also. Forced to reveal his big secret, the Fire Ash Snake sighed coldly. So there's no need for you to wonder if the Rune Snake is still alive. He's always been there, and he's very close to us. Anduin finally understood. No wonder the Fire Ash Snake could stay at the headquarters for so long without worrying about surviving the molting period. He was protected by the Rune Snake. This meant that the Silver Guns had always known about the Rune Snake, making Anduin's desperate attempts to see the Rune Snake seem like a joke to them. Jin Feixia's willingness to take him to the Rune Snake's residence must have been to reveal the secrets of the headquarters. But why did Jin Feixia agree to take him to meet the Rune Snake directly? Anduin couldn't help but shudder at the thought. Either Jin Feixia had murderous intentions towards him, or he had evil intentions towards the Rune Snake. What would happen? Anduin made some calculations and carefully took inventory of the things he had prepared during this time. He gritted his teeth. No matter what awaited him, he would have to face it himself to be sure. In that case, you should contact Golden Snidget now. Thunderbird's voice dropped suddenly. The club has reached this stage now. I must see him today, or I will stay at the headquarters. After finishing speaking, Thunderbird went to the sofa beside him and sat down, posing like a king on his throne. End of this chapter. Chapter 596. No way. Request for recommended monthly ticket. Aren't you putting me in a difficult position? Fire Ash Snake asked anxiously, as he saw Thunderbird acting stubbornly. I can't command him. What if he really doesn't want to show up? Then you need to find a way to take me to the rune snake. Don't talk about the future of the club now. Even the source of the elixir might be in jeopardy. Aren't you worried? Thunderbird retorted. Oh, that's right. Thunderbird sneered mockingly. As the watchdog of the rune snake, he must not give up on you. But what about me? Have you ever considered my feelings? Hey, Fire Ash Snake sighed helplessly, seeing Thunderbird's unyielding attitude. Okay, I'll try to contact him, but I can't guarantee it will work. Seeing the rune snake isn't up to me. Recent events had exhausted Fire Ash Snake. The club had been developing well, and even if the establishment of the British transfer station failed, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But suddenly, it seemed like the Silver Spear was plagued with bad luck. Bad news came one after another. The breeding park was completely wiped out, and the transport team of the Wicked Birds disappeared without a trace. It felt as if someone who knew the club very well was manipulating it from the shadows like a marionette. During this time, Fire Ash Snake couldn't sleep well and was constantly worried. After sending a message to Golden Snidget through the mask, Fire Ash Snake, like Thunderbird, sat silently in the reception room. The two just stared at each other without speaking. However, it seemed that Fire Ash Snake had conveyed the seriousness of the situation in his communication, and within a short while, Golden Snidget actually arrived at the headquarters. When Thunderbird saw Golden Snidget appear, he immediately stood up and greeted him. Tell me, I want to hear your explanation. What's the explanation? For some unknown reason, Golden Snidget's voice was a little shaky, and he didn't seem to be in a good state. You still have the nerve to ask? What's going on with the German Ministry of Magic? Why were the separatist wizards taken over by someone else? Didn't you say the situation was under control? Thunderbird looked ready to attack at any moment. When Thunderbird asked about this matter, Golden Snidget was also furious. What happened? Don't you read the newspapers? Our plan has been completely destroyed by Andre, and now there's nothing left. The breeding park, the goods received from Northern Europe, and even the foundation of the entire Ministry of Magic. Blame that damned Andre and that bastard Claremont. He was a traitor from the beginning. Golden Snidget was no longer as calm as before. He yelled at Thunderbird hysterically. And you still have the nerve to question me. Why does Anduin have strength not weaker than ours? This kid isn't even 20 yet, and you've been in the UK for so many years without knowing this. Thunderbird saw Golden Snidget's outburst and, instead of offering comfort, teased mockingly. What? You messed up, and now you're blaming me? Blaming a little alchemist for your mistakes? If you had listened to me and killed Andre directly, none of this would have happened. Golden Snidget was obviously hurt by Thunderbird's words and glared at him angrily. But he knew in his heart that the other party was right. Things had spiraled out of control. Okay, I don't want to argue with you about this matter, Golden Snidget said, realizing he wasn't winning the argument. He waved his hand dismissively. Now that things have reached this point, it's useless to struggle. The situation can't get any worse. Then what should the club do next? Thunderbird asked, clearly not ready to give up easily. We can't continue to procrastinate, now that we have. Are we just going to sit and wait for death because we have no source of raw materials? Thunderbird asked, his frustration evident. Why are you always in such a hurry? Jinfacia replied irritably. Can't you wait a bit longer? Let me assess the situation before making any plans. Although most of the club's external forces have been cut off, we still have our bottom line. Thunderbird seemed amused by Jinfacia's optimism. Are you still planning to make a comeback in Germany? Haven't you noticed that all the wizards in Germany now see us as a plague? Who would cooperate with us now? And if we predict that Andre will come to power in Germany, do you think we will still have a place there? Jinfacia was taken aback by Thunderbird's words. What do you mean? Let's leave, Thunderbird said decisively. We can go to America. The Black Dragon and I have already established a large territory there, and the resources of magical animals are abundant. Instead of hesitating over Germany's small patch of land, it's better to start over in America. Jinfacia was momentarily stunned by Thunderbird's suggestion. He seemed tempted, but was reluctant to abandon the headquarters he had managed for so many years. Let me think about it before replying. Do you still want to hesitate like before? No wonder you always fail, Thunderbird retorted mercilessly. And this matter is not entirely up to you. I want to see the rune snake and talk to him face to face. He doesn't want to see you. Jinfacia, who had promised to keep Thunderbird away from the rune snake, now seemed very opposed to the idea. He refused without looking back. Really? Isn't there a portal leading to his residence in the headquarters? Can't I ask him if he really doesn't want to see me? Thunderbird looked like an anxious dog, coldly staring at Jinfacia. How do you know about that? Jinfacia was startled and immediately looked at the fire ash snake next to him, who lowered his head in embarrassment after meeting his gaze. Realizing what had happened, Jinfacia shook his head and refused again. No, the rune snake can't see you now. Why? Thunderbird yelled angrily. I have to see him today. What if you abandon me and run away one day? And what right do you have to speak on behalf of the rune snake? Why should I listen to you? Do you have the formula for the elixir? Jinfacia saw how terribly Thunderbird was speaking and immediately knew that Thunderbird was under immense pressure from the club's successive defeats. He realized that Thunderbird had lost trust in him, which was understandable given his recent mistakes in decision-making. After pondering for a moment, Jinfacia nodded helplessly. Okay, I'll take you to see him. Come with me. Golden Snidget led Thunderbird through a side door of the living room. On the other side of the door was a room with a large magic circle, the club's alchemy room used for producing door keys. Shelves lined with 7 or 8 different door keys stood nearby. Without lingering, Golden Snidget went straight to a wall in the room. After casting a simple spell, a stone door cracked open. Beyond the stone door was a room that looked familiar to Anduin. The stone basins and black floor-to-ceiling mirrors arranged there were exactly like the ones he had seen in the Claremont Dark Room. The only difference was that this room. After arriving at the larger room without a fireplace, Snidget approached the stone basin. Contrary to Anduin's expectations, he didn't pour any materials into it. Instead, he suddenly froze as if lost in thought. Then, with a serious and hesitant tone, Jinfacia turned to Thunderbird and asked, Thunderbird, can I trust you? No, Thunderbird responded immediately. How many years have we known each other? Don't you know enough about everyone's temperament? Will you believe me if I say yes? Jinfacia chuckled lightly at himself. It should be said that you are always so honest. It's true that it's difficult to completely trust you, but on the contrary, such honesty makes you more reliable. If you have something to say, just say it. Don't play charades with me, Thunderbird replied, crossing his arms and staring coldly. Jinfacia sighed deeply. Thunderbird, you feel as conflicted as I do about the rune snake. Although he granted us eternal life, he uses the elixir to control us, causing mutual suspicion among us. So? Thunderbird seemed to grasp what Jinfacia was hinting at, but still looked at him coldly. The club's efforts over many years have been ruined. I can't predict what Rune Snake will do when he finds out. Maybe, as you said, he'll abandon the rest of the club and run away, Jinfacia said, despair evident in his voice. You mean you want to join forces with me to subdue him? Thunderbird asked cautiously. No, not subdue. Kill him directly. Jinfacia's tone turned icy. If you kill him, can you guarantee we'll get the elixir's formula? Without the formula, what's the point of killing him? Isn't that equivalent to suicide? Thunderbird scoffed. That's the main point I want to tell you, Jinfacia said, his expression turning mysterious. I know where Rune Snake hides his formula. If we can kill him, the two of us can share the formula. In the future, we won't need to live under his control anymore. End of this chapter. Chapter 597, Finally Seeing the Rune Snake. After hearing Jin Snidget's proposal, Thunderbird seemed somewhat moved. He stood there, bowing his head in thought for a moment, but soon asked, Are you so sure that you can handle him? You know the strength of the Rune Snake. Can we win with just the two of us? It's very difficult to confront him directly, but what if I attack from the shadows? Jin Snidget murmured. After we see the Rune Snake, you will negotiate with him first to divert his attention. Then, we will play it by ear. The probability of success is still very high. That doesn't mean it will be 100% successful, right? If we fail, not only will we have a complete falling out with the rune snake, but if he escapes, we will be cutting ourselves off, Thunderbird said, his voice calm but filled with concern. If we don't give it a try, we will never get ahead. Jin Snidget couldn't help but feel a little amused at seeing the usually impulsive Thunderbird show a timid side. The club has come to the end of the road. If we don't completely control the formula of the elixir, are you going to continue being his lackey? Jin Snidget couldn't help mocking. You must be afraid, right? In comparison, Phoenix, who is usually low-key, was the first among us to choose betrayal. And you, the so-called lawless god of war, are now cowardly and unseemly. Such a boring attempt at provocation, Thunderbird sneered coldly. Fine, if you can succeed, I will cooperate with you. But if you fail, then I will have no choice but to join the rune snake in killing you to show my loyalty. Oh, I didn't expect you to be so afraid of death at a critical moment. Jin Snidget shook his head contemptuously. Fine, as long as you can guarantee that you will follow through after I win. As long as you truly succeed, I will not hesitate for a moment. Thunderbird's tone was firm and full of murderous intent. But don't you have any special information about the rune snake? For example, what type of spells is he good at? It's not like you don't know how cautious he is. Jin Snidget shook his head helplessly. Although I have been loyal to him for so many years, he has never shown complete trust in me. If it wasn't by chance that I discovered where he keeps the formula, I wouldn't be making such a dangerous move now. I hope you are not lying to me. If I get nothing in the end, I guarantee that I will burn you and the entire headquarters to ashes. Anyway, I have lived long enough, Thunderbird said with a cold snort. Seeing Thunderbird's ruthless words, Jin Snidget smiled coldly in his heart. Didn't he act so cowardly before? Who wouldn't say harsh words? Without continuing to talk to Thunderbird, Snidget turned around and fiddled with the stone basin. The operation process was very similar to that of Claremont. After waiting for a while, thick red bubbles began to boil in the stone basin, indicating that they had received a response from the rune snake. He has agreed to meet us. Let's go. Jin Snidget lifted the velvet covering the black floor-to-ceiling mirror and then walked in first, as if entering a deep tunnel. Seeing this, Thunderbird naturally followed closely behind, walking into the black mirror with Jin Snidget. At this moment, there was a hint of doubt and playfulness in Anduin's eyes. The journey through the black mirror wasn't particularly long, but it wasn't short either. After walking for nearly 5 minutes, they appeared outside another similar floor-to-ceiling mirror. The other side of the black mirror looked like a closed room. The surrounding environment, including the ground and walls, was made of rock. The room was very spacious, but there was only this black mirror standing alone. The surroundings were empty and dark, illuminated only by a few ancient torches. Fire was used for lighting. The cramped and humid air made Anduin suspect that this place might be underground. Snidget didn't stop after stepping out of the black mirror and continued to lead the way. Thunderbird followed, walking to the side of his stone room. Snidget cast a spell and opened another door in the stone wall. In front of them was another bottomless tunnel. After walking through this tunnel for a certain distance and passing through a hidden magic door, Snidget led Thunderbird into an open-air valley with a beautiful environment. The tunnel leading to the black mirror was inside the stone mountain behind Thunderbird. At this time, the portal on the stone wall had hidden itself again, making it seem like a place devoid of human habitation. Wait here. Without the consent of the rune snake, you can't see his residence, Golden Snidget shrugged. After all this effort, they had only arrived at the periphery of the rune snake's residence? This guy really isn't afraid of death, Anduin thought, glancing back at the stone wall behind him. Through this journey, Anduin had roughly grasped the character of the rune snake and began to quickly observe his surroundings. His hands, covered by his robe, fiddled with a locator to measure his position. After a while, Anduin seemed to discover something surprising and couldn't help but squint slightly at Golden Snidget, who was facing away from him. At that moment, a small paper crane suddenly appeared in the sky of the valley, flapping its wings and flying towards them. Thunderbird extended his palm and the paper crane landed accurately on it. After Thunderbird unfolded the paper crane completely, he found the words "Snake House" written on it. The note then ignited and disappeared before his eyes. After seeing this text, the world in front of Thunderbird suddenly changed. A gorgeously decorated manor appeared in the previously empty valley. There were even many magical animals living freely on the grass in front of the house, like a paradise. Is this the abode of the rune snake? Not only was the passage to get here very tortuous, but the house was also protected by the curse of loyalty, and the interior environment was surprisingly beautiful. This rune snake seems to value its own life more than anyone else. Let's go. Since the rune snake is willing to reveal the address to you, it means he is willing to let you in, Golden Snidget muttered lightly, then entered the manor first. Anduin, under Thunderbird's mask, smiled coldly and quickly followed. After entering the manor, the surrounding magical animals looked at the two curiously, then continued to play together as if nothing had happened. The gate of the manor house opened immediately as the two approached. The decorated carved beams and painted buildings in the house were surrounded by historical works of art, such as exquisite oil paintings, whole cabinets of silverware, and luxurious carpets covering the floor. It made one wonder whether this place was a secluded residence or a palace. Under the leadership of Golden Snidget, the two arrived at a huge, brightly lit reception room. A well-proportioned person was sitting on the sofa in the center. The figure on the seat wore a sterling silver mask and a satin robe embroidered with gorgeous patterns. This was obviously the rune snake himself. However, Anduin still noticed an abnormality in the opponent's body. Although the rune snake was covered all over, Anduin could still see some snake-like scale patterns on the neck that was slightly exposed from the edge of the mask. Is this what Phoenix mentioned, the side effect of the immortal medicine? Do people grow snakeskin after taking it for many years? Is this a dominant characteristic, or does it mean something else? The party had now completely transformed into something else. But just as Anduin was secretly planning his next move, the rune snake spoke first. "Gerald, this is the first time you've visited my residence. How is it? It's not quite what you imagined, is it?" The rune snake addressed the Thunderbird with a welcoming tone, as if greeting an old friend he hadn't seen in years. "Heh! I didn't expect you, an old man, to be living so lavishly. I thought after all these years you'd be tired of these material things," the Thunderbird replied, casually picking up a piece of silverware from a nearby shelf and toying with it. "Do you still hate me that much?" The rune snake sighed, speaking like an elder. "I wasn't the only one who stopped you from saving Grindelwald back then. It was a unanimous decision, wasn't it? Since you've taken the elixir, you should prioritize your own life and avoid getting involved in dangerous matters." "So I hate not only you," the Thunderbird retorted, glancing at the Golden Snidget beside him. "Don't act like a loving father in front of me. Although you are my adoptive father in name, I owe you nothing after all these years. Is that how you feel?" The rune snake chuckled and shook his head. "Well, if that's the case, let's cut to the chase. Why have you come to see me today? I thought I had always entrusted Snidget with the club's affairs." "The club is finished." The Thunderbird's voice was filled with long-suppressed anger. "Because you blindly trusted the Golden Snidget under his so-called wise leadership, our German division strategy has completely failed. The transportation route to North America is blocked, the breeding park has been cleaned out, and now the club has no raw materials left except for the few creatures outside the gate." "What?" The rune snake froze, then turned to the Golden Snidget standing next to him in surprise. "Is everything the Thunderbird said true? This?" The Golden Snidget looked ashamed, lowering his head dejectedly. "I'm sorry, Father. It's my fault. I failed." End of this chapter. Chapter 598, Mutation and Mutation. It's not something that can be revealed just because it's unfavorable. What happened to the club during this period? Rune Snake stared at Jin Facia, his eyes piercing as if he wanted to nail him to the spot. It started a month ago. Jin Facia adopted a humble demeanor and began recounting the issues in the breeding park. He detailed the events that transpired within the club during this period, even mentioning that he and Thunderbird suspected Phoenix might be the mastermind behind the scenes. In other words, in just 1 month, the club has transformed from a monstrous giant with thousands of raw materials controlling half of Germany to a street mouse that everyone despises, losing all sources of goods. RuneSnake was livid after hearing Jinfei Xia's account. He slapped the armrest and stood up, pointing at Jinfei Xia. "You idiot, why didn't you tell me all this earlier? You waited until the club was on the brink of collapse to come here." "Why?" Thunderbird interjected coldly. "Isn't it because you're afraid that when things go south, you'll run away alone? Isn't this how you've survived all these years, with your 3 escape routes, you cowardly turtle?" Thunderbird's merciless taunt made RuneSnake turn his gaze to him, leaving his back to Jinfei Xia. "You still have the nerve to taunt me at a time like this? I know you always think I've been using the elixir to control and manipulate you, but use your brain for once. If it weren't for my elixir, would you have gained almost endless life? Can you still stand here calmly mocking me? After all these years, I've always regarded you as my own flesh and blood." "Shh." Thunderbird seemed irritated by RuneSnake's rhetoric. "What? Do you expect me to call you father like a naive child? If that's the case, why don't you show your fatherly love and share the elixir formula with your precious children?" "You." RuneSnake's veins bulged from Thunderbird's retort. Realizing he could never win against Thunderbird, he waved his hand dismissively. "Stop talking about such useless things. What we should focus on now is the future of the club. Is there any remedy?" "Remedy? What remedy?" Thunderbird sneered and shook his head. "If you go out now and tell others you're from the Silver Spear, do you think those wizards outside won't drown you with their spit? Then what should we do?" RuneSnake, usually forceful but simple-minded, became irritable whenever faced with a problem. "You've been operating outside for so long. You must have a solution, right?" "A solution?" Thunderbird pointed back with his thumb. "My solution is to leave, completely withdraw the club from Germany. Don't cling to European territory. Go to North America. We have plenty of time to redevelop the club there. The environment is much better, and the resources of magical animals are countless." "Leave?" RuneSnake couldn't help but lower his head in contemplation. He hesitantly muttered, "But we've been operating in Europe for so many years to build our current foundation. Are we just going to abandon so many branches? Can't we figure out a way to establish a direct shipping route to North America?" "RuneSnake, even after a few hundred years, you're still so naive." Thunderbird gave him an annoyed look. "Why are you as indecisive as Jinfei Xia? How many raw materials do these European branches produce for the club each year? Now that Germany is under Andre's control, how many raw materials can be shipped in? You don't want to withdraw from Europe, and I don't want to share my territory in North America with you." "You." Always being ridiculed by Thunderbird, RuneSnake glared at him angrily. At this moment, the Thunderbird showed no fear and stared firmly at the RuneSnake. "Thunderbird, can't you talk this out?" Jinfei Xia, standing behind the RuneSnake, noticed the tension between the two and tried to intervene. As he leaned forward, a sudden change occurred. Walking behind the RuneSnake, Jin Snidget suddenly produced a dagger that glowed with a strange light. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and stabbed it into the back of the RuneSnake. "Ah!" The RuneSnake screamed in pain from the unexpected attack. A terrifying concentration of magic power burst from his body, instantly forming several layers of protection on his surface. "Kanglan Yan Yan!" The Thunderbird, seeing that Snidget had succeeded, did not hesitate. He pulled out his wand, and a long knife made of blue fiend fire instantly condensed on it. He slashed fiercely at the RuneSnake. The moment the RuneSnake's protective shield formed, it was struck by the fiery blade. The solid blue hellblade collided with the shield, breaking the outermost layer in the blink of an eye. Jin Snidget was not idle either. After stabbing the knife, he threw out his wand and used pure magic to manifest a translucent short spear. He stabbed it heavily into the back of the RuneSnake, penetrating another shield. "Why? Dennis, why did you betray me?" The RuneSnake seemed unsurprised by the Thunderbird's attack, but Jin Snidget's backstab was unacceptable to him. "You talk too much, father." Snidget gritted his teeth and muttered. He increased the strength in his right hand, holding the short spear, putting the last two shields of the RuneSnake in jeopardy. Puff! The dual attack worsened his injury. The rune snake, under his mask, vomited blood in pain but still held on. He shouted, bursting out astonishingly powerful magic, and pushed the two attackers away abruptly. The rune snake leaped into the air through the hard-pressed gap, twisting his body like a rubber ball into a long snake, and flew towards the exit. Seeing the rune snake trying to escape, Thunderbird swung out a row of fiendfire to block his route. But the rune snake, in his special form, was extremely fast. He twisted his body to avoid the flames and slipped through the gap. "Come on," Jin Snidget shouted, casting an anti-apparition curse. Thunderbird, dragging Yanren, rushed out without delay. "You idiot, why didn't you just use the killing curse for the sneak attack? How much impact can a broken knife have on him?" Thunderbird, following the rune snake, couldn't help but complain to Jin Snidget. "I think you are the idiot," Jin Facia cursed angrily. "With the keenness of the rune snake, do you think he wouldn't detect the movement of my magic power? The killing curse has an obvious killing intent. It's no different from a prank for us. My knife is covered with rotten tissue. As long as he doesn't get time to rest, he will rot and die in a short time. I hope that's the case. If we let him escape, we'll have nothing to eat." Thunderbird yelled at Snidget, then increased his speed. During the chase, Thunderbird threw out fiery flames from time to time. It seemed to prove Jin Snidget's words true, as the rune snake didn't even need to look back, relying on his perception to dodge flexibly. However, the rune snake, struggling to escape, seemed truly affected by the short knife. His speed slowed down quickly, and he was finally cornered by Thunderbird and Snidget. The corridor echoed with tension. "Why are you doing this to me? Aren't you afraid that the elixir's formula will die with me? You'll perish soon after killing me." The rune snake, panting and cornered against the stone wall, shouted at his assailants. "Stop bluffing." Jin Snidget, equally out of breath, exhaled deeply before sneering. "I've been following you for years, and I haven't been idle. I've long since noticed that your memory is fading over time. Would someone as cautious as you rely solely on your memory for the formula? You've backed it up, and it's stored in the basement of this manor, isn't it?" How do you know?" The rune snake's eyes widened in panic as Jin Snidget revealed his secret. "Don't kill me. I'll share the recipe with you, and we can all go our separate ways. Don't you remember how I nurtured you all those years? Your so-called nurturing love? I've already reported it to the Saints Association." Thunderbird, hearing that there truly was a formula, stepped forward excitedly. He raised his blue hellblade and slashed fiercely. Facing Thunderbird's all-out attack, the rune snake, in a desperate struggle, straightened up and flicked his wand with all his might. "Mysterious snake!" he shouted, casting an astonishing spell. Two intertwined turquoise energy snakes shot out from the tip of his wand, spiraling towards the blue hellblade as if they were alive, wrapping around it. At that moment, another twist occurred. Avada Kedavra! Snidget, who had been standing behind Thunderbird, took advantage of the magical stalemate and suddenly cast the killing curse. But his target wasn't the rune snake, it was Thunderbird. Ah! The sickly green death curse struck Thunderbird's lower back with brutal force. Thunderbird let out a scream and collapsed, his body going limp. The rune snake, seizing the opportunity, swung his wand and sent Thunderbird flying backwards with a flick. End of this chapter. Chapter 599, Mutation and Rebirth. 4. Why? The Thunderbird, who had been thrown aside and hit with an Avada Kedavra, was still clinging to life. His resilience was remarkable, but he lay on the ground, wandless and unable to rise. He could only muster the strength to lift his head and gaze at the two figures before him. "I'm sorry, my child," said Golden Snidget, who had ambushed the Thunderbird. His tone was filled with regret. "I didn't want to be so cruel to you, but your proposal, while touching, was too risky. Following you to America to face you and the Black Dragon, who have complete control there, was too dangerous for me." Golden Snidget, having completed his sneak attack, walked over to the rune snake and pulled the dagger from his back. The rune snake winced in pain, indicating that his previous injury was not entirely feigned. "Child!" Thunderbird's eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at the two. Who are you?" Golden Snidget and Rune Snake turned to face him simultaneously. They removed their masks in unison and responded, each taking turns to speak. Golden Snidget, who else could I be? I am the father you have always hated, and the leader of the club, the Rune Snake, the master of the elixir formula. I am your former brother, now the Golden Snidget of the club. I was once the Minister of Magic of Germany, Dario Pete. Unfortunately, that avatar was destroyed by a kid who came out of nowhere, and my injuries have not healed until now. If it weren't for this, I wouldn't have designed such a trap just for you. It's a pity. Gerard, although you have always opposed me, you are also the most capable one in the club. It's a pity that I am not perfect now. With you and the Black Dragon both existing, it is really difficult to control. I didn't want to do this. If things had gone well, if you hadn't pushed me so hard, we might have been able to coexist. As they spoke, their tones and rhythms were so consistent that it was almost as if the same person was speaking. Thunderbird finally saw the true faces of Golden Snidget and Rune Snake. Their features bore a resemblance to Pete's, and their body shapes were strikingly similar. Golden Snidget appeared younger, while Rune Snake looked about 40, with mottled, snakeskin-like textures on his cheeks and chin. How is it possible? You were the same person from the beginning. But Golden Snidget, he grew up with us. Thunderbird struggled to accept this absurd reality. He tried to stand, but was too weak, only managing to growl hoarsely in grief and indignation. Gerald, Golden Snidget chided as he slowly approached, shaking his head. You always look at the sky, but the magic in this world is like countless stars. You, a reckless guy who only knows how to increase the power of spells, when will you understand this truth? Golden Snidget knelt beside Thunderbird and gently removed the mask from his face. He smiled mockingly. Earlier, you asked why I didn't use the killing curse during the sneak attack. Look at me now. Don't I use it? But speaking of which, your physique is really strong to have endured this long. My death curse, I can still survive until now. If that's the case, it would be a waste to let you die like this. You can use your powerful body to recreate the physical clone. With your combat power, it's not a loss if you calculate it like this. After finishing his words, Jin Facia reached out to touch Thunderbird's body, intending to recover the elixir from him. However, when Jin Facia touched Thunderbird, he was surprised by the sensation and his eyes widened involuntarily. At that moment, another mutation occurred. Thunderbird, who had appeared very weak, suddenly stretched out his left hand and clasped Jin Facia's right wrist fiercely. Simultaneously, a long sword appeared in Thunderbird's right hand, which he swung backhanded. The sharp blade sliced across Jin Facia's neck like a hot knife through butter. Puff! Jin Facia's expression remained one of astonishment as his head suddenly felt lighter and began to separate from his body. His neck cavity spouted a fountain of scarlet blood. Ah! The runic snake in the distance seemed to be hit hard as well. It clutched its chest with its hands, cold sweat breaking out on its face as if enduring unbearable pain. After swiftly dealing with Jin Facia, Anduin threw the corpse aside and straightened up with a swift motion, showing no signs of his previous weakness. Standing tall again, Anduin wasted no time. He grabbed Anmi from his waist and made a stabbing gesture with the spear. Thunder sword, piercing! As Anduin thrust his sword forward, an astonishing coercion surged from Anmi's body. A blue-silver electric light, like a laser cannon, blasted towards the runic snake in the direction pointed by the long sword. Although the runic snake was severely injured by Jin Facia's death, it did not forget its years of combat experience. Seeing the menacing lightning strike, it instinctively raised its wand and shot a turquoise spell to counter it head-on. It was the mysterious snake spell it had used before. The Thundersword piercing collided head-on with the mysterious snake, just like two Super Saiyans facing off. They stalemated at the intersection, bursting out with a loud roar. The intertwined magic power rolled outwards, expanding continuously, converging into a stream of light mixed with silver and cyan. These streams of light poured outward, spreading to the walls, ground, and even the ceiling around the corridor, causing them to either corrode or be annihilated. After a while, the magnificent corridor where the two fought was full of potholes. The center of the magic collision had completely wiped out the ground and walls, almost drawing a clear dividing line between the two. This confrontation lasted for nearly 30 seconds. Anduin, who was desperately outputting magic power, felt exhausted. His magic power had almost bottomed out, but the runic snake was still strong. This startled him. According to his speculation, after the deaths of Pete and Snidget, the runic snake should have been severely affected. How could it still show such tyrannical fighting power? How exaggerated was this guy's magic reserve? No, I am no match for the runic snake in a war of attrition. This old thing has lived for hundreds of years. Even if it is in a weakened state now, its mana is probably several times, even 10 times, that of mine. Thinking of this, Anduin immediately switched to holding the sword with both hands. He raised it up violently, changing the thunder and lightning giant sword from a stabbing motion to a protruding one. As Anduin adjusted his stance, the rune snake's spell was also redirected, shifting from a state of wrestling to an upward surge. This sudden change caused the rune snake to stagger and fall back, leading to unexpected damage to its mansion. From the outside, one could see two beams of light, like searchlights, slicing through the manor from about 1/3 of the way up, effectively cutting the mansion in half, as if it were a cake. These beams of light continued to ascend with undiminished power, aiming directly at the distant sky, seemingly intent on piercing the clouds. After this intense magical confrontation, Anduin quickly withdrew his magical power. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small crystal bottle, no larger than a thumb, from the front pocket of his tactical vest. He swiftly uncapped the bottle and drank its contents. This was Phoenix Tears, a potion Anduin had prepared in advance. Not only did it rapidly heal injuries, but it also replenished mana quickly. Anduin had tested it before. With his substantial mana reserves, it took only seconds to fully recharge. To ensure his safety, Anduin then reached behind his waist and pulled out a round shield with a diameter of about 30 centimeters. After discovering that Snidget was still alive, Anduin had rushed to create a large amount of alchemical equipment in preparation for a potential future battle. This shield was one of those creations. Besides its sturdy structure and strong defensive capabilities, the shield could absorb and rebound spells of a certain strength. It could also use the absorb magic to release a wide-area protective spell. It was because of this shield that Anduin remained calm and adhered to his plan, even when he realized that Jin Snidget was about to attack him. Jin Snidget was right. For individuals like them, using the Avada Kedavra curse was almost laughable. How could Anduin, fully armed and prepared, be struck down by a killing curse? End of this chapter. Chapter 600. Swordsmanship. While Anduin was recovering and staying alert, the rune snake on the opposite side also straightened up after coughing violently a few times. The sudden death of the golden Snidget had hit him hard, but after so many years of accumulation, the rune snake's body had gradually moved beyond the category of ordinary wizards. His physique and magical power reserves were probably more terrifying than most magical creatures in the world. You're not a Thunderbird. You're Anduin. After taking a few breaths, the rune snake looked ferociously at the man who was still wearing Gerald's face and couldn't help but growl loudly. Oh, you've only realized it now? That proves my acting skills are still very good, my dear father. Seeing that his identity had been discovered, Anduin didn't bother to pretend any longer and directly changed back to his original appearance. His entire body shook, and the silver spear robe he was wearing shattered into pieces, revealing the black clothes underneath. At this moment, Anduin was wearing a pair of tall tactical leather boots, and a metal belt with a silver buckle was tied around his waist. His upper body was clad in a tight-fitting tactical vest that resembled a formal vest. Twirling a monocle in his front pocket and placing it in his eye socket, he looked at the rune snake with a chuckle. Sure enough, it's you. It's impossible for Thunderbird to use these toys that disgust him. What about the other Thunderbirds? Why did you appear here in his form? The rune snake, after seeing Anduin reveal the truth, asked with a puzzled expression. Then, as if struck by a sudden realization, he cursed. Could it be that you are behind everything that happened in the club during this period? Impossible. If that were the case, how would you know so many inside stories about the club? Did you just realize the point now? It seems your brain isn't working well. Anduin sneered while feeling his body recover. Rune Snake, Anduin yelled sharply. Thunderbird's hatred for you is stronger than you imagined. Otherwise, how could such an arrogant person choose to cooperate with me? Sure enough, as if confirming his conjecture, the Rune Snake's face became extremely ugly. Gerald, I didn't expect that you would rather collude with outsiders than betray me. After unraveling the doubts in his heart, the Rune Snake looked at Anduin with suspicion again. No. Even if Gerald chose to collude with you, he would have chosen to join forces with the Golden Snidget to deal with me before. But how could you realize that the Golden Snidget and I were setting up a trap for you? Cut. Anduin curled his lips in disdain. You two tried to fool me with your acting skills. As soon as the Golden Snidget talked to you, I realized something was wrong. If the acting is so unprofessional, don't act. Otherwise, you'll just make people laugh. Facing the Rune Snake, Anduin never intended to tell the other party the truth and just opened his mouth to talk nonsense. In fact, from the conversation with Pete before his death, Anduin had roughly sketched the psychological portrait of the other party. Whether it was Pete, the Golden Snidget, or the Rune Snake, they were all extremely suspicious and indecisive. Anduin speculated that perhaps because of living too long, when faced with things the Rune Snake couldn't understand, he would always show a state of self-doubt, just like Pete had wanted to ask for help before he died. Like Anduin's questioning, he showed an extremely morbid quality. At the same time, this trait made him not decisive enough when making decisions, always thinking before and after. The advantage of this was that after making a real judgment, the matter would be handled very properly, with few loopholes. However, the overly cautious character made him seem slow to react. Anduin felt a sense of hesitation in Golden Snidget's decisions after he found a breakthrough in the club's strategy. Initially, the strategy seemed flawless, but once Anduin disrupted the balance, Golden Snidget's subsequent decisions appeared uncertain. Anduin's suspicion about a possible connection between Golden Snidget and Rune Snake stemmed from his prior knowledge that Pete and Golden Snidget were the same person. Although the concept of cloning seemed far-fetched, Anduin had no choice but to accept it after ruling out all other possibilities. At first, Anduin didn't expect Golden Snidget and Rune Snake to be the same person, especially since the memories provided by Thunderbird showed the other party growing up with him. Additionally, Golden Snidget's proposal to eliminate Rune Snake together seemed genuine. However, when Anduin arrived outside the manor and pinpointed the location, he was surprised. The valley's location was very close to the endpoint of the portkey teleportation he received from Pete, almost at the same spot, which seemed unbelievable. Logically, as a club spear, Pete wouldn't maintain such a trusting relationship with Rune Snake. The escape portkey should be placed in a secure location, but the teleportation point was near Rune Snake's address, indicating a possible connection between Pete and Rune Snake. After learning this information, Anduin prepared in secret and paid more attention to Golden Snidget. The events that unfolded confirmed Anduin's caution was justified. Acting skills? So that's it. Rune Snake, like Pete before him, reflected on himself. It seems I need to pay more attention to details in the future. Is this situation because I wasn't careful enough? In the future? Anduin sneered at Rune Snake's mention of the future. Don't talk about later like Pete. You're staying here today. Just you? Rune Snake seemed amused. Although I admit you're powerful, you're not a Thunderbird, and I'm not using Pete's body anymore. You should think about your own death. I didn't expect the leader of the club to be afraid of his top general. Anduin remained unfazed by Rune Snake's intimidation. But I have some bad news for you. Thunderbird has been notified and might arrive soon. Can you handle both of us? I'm protected by the fidelity charm, so what use is he even if he comes? Rune Snake maintained a certain calmness. But just in case, let's deal with you quickly. Reject. Rune Snake raised his hand, but instead of using the powerful single-body spell Mystic Snake, he used gravitational magic, a spell Anduin had seen Pete use before. Do you still want to use the same move against me? Naive! Anduin coldly smiled as he saw Rune Snake cast the spell. He patted the belt on his abdomen with his left hand. Immediately, 8 metal branches protruded from his waist like a peacock spreading its tail. These branches, resembling insect legs, stabbed into the floor, firmly anchoring Anduin to the ground. Although the horizontal repulsion from Rune Snake was strong and domineering, pushing all the furniture and building materials around, Anduin remained steadfast, his new legs firmly fixed to the ground. Debris littered the path, but it seemed ineffective against Anduin, who stood firmly as if rooted to the ground. He raised the round shield in his left hand, and the large protective barrier it generated easily deflected the stones and other building debris flying towards him. "Thunder Sword! Destroy Meteor!" Anduin shouted, seeing that his strategy was working. He drew his sword and slashed, using the same move that had proven successful against Pete before. Anduin had developed a variety of magic sword techniques by combining Wild Thunder and Destroyer. One of these techniques was Puncture, which boasted astonishing penetration and speed. However, Anduin dared not use this move against the Rune Snake, as it would be asking for trouble against such a bottomless monster. Another technique was Stormblade, which imitated Andre's Blade Storm. Anduin replaced Andre's Metal Blade with Wild Thunder Sword energy. However, this move consumed a significant amount of magic power, at least 10 points per second, so he decided not to use it during the trial stage. Anduin had previously tried directing Wild Thunder underground against Pete, but it had no effect other than making his opponent fly. Additionally, Swift Sword was a melee move effective against enemies within 10 meters. For this occasion, the most suitable techniques were Whirlwind of Knife, Destroy Meteor, and Electronic Carnival. Although Anduin had given these moves different names, their effects were similar. They all shaped the Wild Thunder into a meteor-like magical sword aura for a tracking attack. Among them, Knife Whirlwind was the largest, about the size of a dagger, followed by Destruction Meteor, which was not much bigger than a toothpick. Anduin feared that Electronic Carnival would be affected by gravity magic, and since Destroy Meteor had previously dealt a fatal blow to Pete, he chose this move. The Rune Snake on the opposite side was surprised that Anduin had found a way to counter his gravitational spell. However, when he saw Anduin using the same splitting arrow-like lightning magic, he couldn't help but sneer. "Let me show you what the real difference is." "Separation technique," the Rune Snake declared. End of this chapter.